Adoption of the agenda. You want to approve it, including those?
Yeah. I'm going to make a motion to approve the agenda and ask that we go to item 6 in your agenda, and that we put 6A, B, D, and E, and F, and G into potential consent.
You want to have to repeat that, hold on.
Not a problem. And this,
Okay, hold on.
okay. These are the policies. They seem pretty straightforward. When you get to it, let me know and I'll make a motion again.
If it would help, we thought we might have technology problems today, so we made you a hard copy of the agenda in the folder, if
Yeah.
that helps.
Right.
And you, sir?
Right there. Got one. Yep.
Hey, man.
Okay, thank you.
So Joyce, go to section 6, which is the policy and personnel. A, B, D, E, F, and G. 2 of them are naming of facilities done by the community groups.
A, B, D, E, F,
And G.
those are all mine, fine. I'm happy with that.
All right.
All right, is there a second? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
All right, we have a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
All right, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is the public comment section. We have the first 3 people we've got on the market, and just on the docket are Nina Britt, Jared Hove, Braxton Williams, and then Gina Voorhees. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm Nina Fields-Britt. Thursday's listening session made one thing abundantly clear. Parents and the community overwhelmingly disapprove of CCSD's consolidation and closure of proposals for District 20 schools. I sincerely hope the board takes that to heart and will not rush to vote this fall on changes that no one wants, and that CCSD staff has conceded recently were not vetted by teachers and administrators when they were being developed. As for proposals for Buist going forward, CCSD needs to be transparent about its priorities. On Thursday, Dr. Postlewaite mentioned a change to the entrance criteria for Buist, but provided no specifics. If that refers to the academic entrance criteria, those are critical to Buist's long track record of success. And I know I'm not alone in opposing any change that lowers those standards. I would ask CCSD to provide a mechanism to get candid feedback from Buist teachers and administrators about the effects of lowering those criteria before proceeding with any such plan. Dr. Postlewaite also reiterated a desire to expand Buist, seemingly irrespective of the school mall approach previously proposed. CCSD needs to be transparent about who its expansion goals for Buist are designed to benefit, because expansion not only comes at a cost to Buist, where the success of the program depends on the school's size and its K-8 program being housed in one campus, something that is supported by research. But that expansion also comes at a steep price to the other schools that would be displaced and merged to accommodate an expanded Buist. Changes driven by buildings and headcounts fail to account for the communities and programs housed in those buildings. If the goal of expansion is diversity, that absolutely should be prioritized, but there must be a plan that pointedly addresses increasing diversity in the applicant pool. Expansion alone will not do that. Please thoughtfully consider the impact of proposals on students and communities before rushing to answer. Yes, there are children sitting in desks while adults are debating. But it is more detrimental to the students sitting in those desks to rush into the wrong decision.
Thank you. Next up is Jared Hove. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Braxton Williams, Gina Voorhees, and then Elizabeth Hamilton. Go ahead.
Thank you. When our daughter was given a seat at Buist Academy last year, it felt like we won the lottery. We thought we were getting great things at Buist: a rigorous, holistic IB curriculum, access to foreign languages, and a caring environment. In many ways, her experiences matched those expectations. Our daughter loves reading and is excited to go to school. So news came out that there might be changes. I know it raised concerns. For me, I was and am cautiously hopeful. For when I'm aware that we won the lottery, I know there are many parents who did not. I know there are many more parents who look like me and have incomes like me who won that lottery. So I broadly support some of the changes being discussed. I think Butte should be larger, and I think we should have different entrance requirements. But I also think we should be clear on what we hope to achieve by the things being changed. From work in education, I know these decisions are challenging. Looking at data from across the district and truthfully acknowledging the history of Charleston, I hope we would prioritize equity. Do our changes make for more equitable opportunities for all kids? Diversity. Do our schools enable the future generation to learn with and from students of different backgrounds and life experience? And outcomes. Do the changes increase opportunities for learning and success for all students? I cannot look at the district as a parent and citizen and say that we don't have deep problems that need fixing. I would question what we are really screening for with testing the kindergarten level for advanced studies. The issue of making schools diverse and inclusive is an urgent necessity. We know what it looks like to live in a segregated society. We just need to look around us and look in our schools. If we want our city and our society to look different in the future, we need to look at our schools today. Our children are facing a rate of change in the world and labor market that are unlike what we faced growing up. They're facing divisions in our society that we haven't overcome. We need to do better for them. I know the path there won't be easy. However, if you are willing to make the choices that make our schools more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive so all children have opportunities for success and fulfillment, then I, as a parent, am with you. We need a school system where every child and every parent in CCSD feels like they won the lottery when they walk into their school. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Braxton Williams, followed by Gina Voorhees, Elizabeth Hamilton, and then Danielle Hartley.
Hello. All right, so we talk a lot about what we don't like. Well, here's some solutions for you guys. You might want to write this stuff down. There's actually a think tank called the Century Foundation, which does things such as deal with the issues you're trying to deal. And there you go to this webpage, and then you look this up. It's a toolkit. It says recruiting and enrolling a diverse student body in public choice schools, which is exactly what you're presented with, and they do it successfully in several states. So instead of looking at solutions and spending money on solutions and interviewing people that don't know what they're talking about, go to someone that knows what they're talking about, that has done it successfully, and implement these changes. Now, I'm not asking for you to create more people, just create another list. Keep the numbers how they are, because the bigger numbers and less teachers is not a good plan. Like this middle school mall, it's a bad idea. I was at the listening session, and everybody there was against it. The Charleston Progressive students, the teachers, the parents were against it. The Mitchell students, teachers, and parents were against it. The Butte students, teachers, and parents were against it. In fact, everybody there clapped wildly when they were against it. And that means you should not do it, because those are your constituents, and your job is to do what they want you to do. Now, middle school mall, you talk about it doesn't have enough teachers for the smaller students. Well, your math is wrong, because if you want to hire teachers to teach at the middle school mall, you're going to have to hire the same amount of teachers to effectively teach at the smaller schools. You want one guidance counselor for 500 kids? Well, that guidance counselor, A, quit, B, be ineffective, C, be ineffective, and then quit. If you don't have enough money, then go and have one of your meetings, your private meetings, and convene and move the money from buildings to hiring teachers and paying teachers, good teachers, to do their jobs, and the students and the district will thrive. Thank you.
Next item is Gina Voorhees, Elizabeth Hamilton, Danielle Hartley, and followed by Colin Griffin.
Hi, good afternoon. As you know, I'm a Butte parent, but today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of keeping our K through 8 family together and not breaking it apart. There have been numerous studies that have been performed across the United States over many years that have shown that there are both advantages in academic achievement and also on social grounds in a K through 8 situation, as opposed to children being in a separate elementary from a middle school. So let's be honest, the middle school years are pretty tricky from a social perspective. And these studies have shown that students thrive much better when you keep the K through 8 grades together. So studies that I've come across include, there's a Milwaukee study. Again, it controlled for a lot of different occurrences, but it looked at elementary and separate middle school as opposed to K through 8 students. And the study found that students in the K through 8 schools had higher academic achievement, both on their GPA and standardized tests. Moreover, students participated more in extracurricular activities and demonstrated greater leadership skills. In Baltimore, same thing. Students in the K through 8 schools scored much higher than their middle school counterparts on standardized tests in reading, language arts, and math. Same thing in Florida and also in Philadelphia. There's also a study that followed these kids into high school. And it showed these same kids in high school, the ones that came from a K through 8 situation, performed better. Their academic gains were increased over those ones that were separated for elementary and middle schools. So I'm hearing a lot of talk about you breaking apart the Bust family into a separate elementary and a middle school program. However, this is going to result in lower academic achievement for the students, and it's also going to result in problems from a social perspective as well. So I'd ask the board not to rush into anything and carefully consider the merits of a K through 8 education.
Thank you. Next up is Elizabeth Hamilton, Danielle Hartley, followed by Colin Griffin.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Dr. Postlewaite, and CCSD staff. I want to begin by thanking you for the number of hours you've put in the last week. I've been very encouraged by this messy process. Ironic that that was the headline, a messy process for CCSD. Our families are engaged from different backgrounds. We are circling around the goal of lifting up the most vulnerable and most needy and historically underserved communities. We have awareness of just how deep this problem lies. I've been encouraged that there is improved communication. The number of calls I got for the D20 constituent board meeting is exponentially more than any I've historically received before. The website was updated with the PowerPoint slides from the presentations. The synopsis was helpful. The use of Facebook. So I'm encouraged by that. I hope it's genuine. I hope it will continue. And the question I heard on those Facebook posts is, when is the next one? I missed this. And 45 people had 1 minute to speak. That's not enough. Keep it going. Continue the dialogue. Make it easier to sign up to speak at board meetings. We have to get here an hour and a half before we have an opportunity to speak. Can we sign up online to get our name on the daily roster? The Post and Courier saying that this is directed by the board not to have detailed plans. Well, staff, if you've got detailed plans, now is the time to show us. Show us that there's analysis, that there's best practice data to support these recommendations. Board, please do not create an artificial sense of urgency. Our children should not have to deal with a messy process. They should have the results and the impact of an intentional and thoughtful process. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Danielle Hartley, and followed by Colin Griffin.
I'm going to pass.
Okay, got it. All right, Colin Griffin? Colleen, excuse me. I left an E out on there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Colleen Griffin, and I have a 9th grader at Academic Magnet High School. Improving the academic outcomes for our high poverty students should be a top priority for CCSD, and we can and should work to expand access and enroll more of these academically gifted students at Academic Magnet. I'm here to ask that any changes to the admission policies do not eliminate the requirement that students must still qualify based on the rubric. I also ask that the rubric not be made less challenging. Academic Magnet is an extremely successful school because the students it admits have been academically prepared to be there. It's most important right now that CCSD focus on reducing the disparities in outcomes in the elementary and middle schools in our district. This will create a more balanced pipeline of talented and prepared kids applying to Academic Magnet. And more importantly, it will improve outcomes for all of our children, not just those who are academically gifted. If we reduce the rubric scoring criteria, we would undermine a core reason for the impressive success of this school. In sum, I believe to make the school more representative of all of the students in Charleston County, the answer lies in preparation and outreach to high poverty gifted and talented students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we've just got 2 that are not on the agenda. If it's all right with the board, if we can just get through these so that they can go ahead and speak. Mr. Richard Habersham, and followed by Stacia Huger. UG.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to talk about a problem that we have in our community. It's a bus stop. I live on Bennett Charles Road in Mount Pleasant. The bus used to, well, I got a letter Friday. Stating that y'all gonna stop the bus route on Bennett Charles and Bobo. Now, we got a bunch of kids that lives on Bobo and Bennett Charles. The bus come pick my grandchild up at 6:30 in the morning. It's dark out there. You got a large volume of cars that comes on Bennett Charles and Bobo. They want these kids to walk almost a mile to Highway 41 to catch the bus. That is not acceptable to me or the other residents in this area. They said this, the bus, they're gonna stop because it's unsafe. If it's unsafe for a bus to come down a road, a county road, at 6:30 in the morning when it's black dark, what you gonna say about a kid walking down a dark road at that time to a major highway, Highway 41? I don't know if y'all been on Highway 41, but at the end of Bennett Charles and 41, they have numerous accidents on 41. And you're gonna put kids in danger by stopping the bus and coming down these two roads to go back all the way on Highway 41. And the only other way they can cut, make it shorter is cutting across a ditch full of water through the woods. Now that's created another problem. You got snakes out there. You got a ditch. I don't know if y'all want y'all kids to walk through the woods, through this stuff. And we want the bus to continue to come on these two roads, just to pick these kids up for the safety value. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll get your contact information before you leave here to follow up with you. Yep.
Well, we need to, because I just got this Friday afternoon. They're supposed to stop it tomorrow.
Okay.
Can you give a copy to Ms. Taylor, please, and so that we can get a copy of that?
Yeah. You got it.
It's by floor sitting. She can have mine.
Okay. Next up, Ms. Hugie.
Good afternoon. Basically the same issue. I've got a sixth grader at Cario, and all I wanted was just for them to move the bus into our neighborhood rather than have the children stand on Highway 41. 2 days after school started, there was a wreck just feet away from the children. 3 cars, okay? I walked with these kids. The bus couldn't even get to them because it was so crazy and congested. It was chaos. We walked, I had to walk with the children down 41 to get to the bus. It's unsafe, clearly. And I realize that some stops have to be in spots that are, congested. I understand that for safety issues, but that bus can come into our neighborhood. That bus can come in and safely turn around. If there are things in the way of that, we implore your help to try and figure out what's best, but there's no way in the world that it's safest for the children to stand on the highway. There has to be some other safer alternate solution to that. There's no sidewalks, no lights, as he said. The bus has been doing it. They're gonna stop at 5, 6, 7-year-olds, elementary school children, catching no other neighborhood on 41 has their babies standing on the highway. There has to be another safer alternate solution. And the neighborhood, we're willing to work with whomever, safety, zoning, whomever it is that is in charge of that to help us come up with something safer. We implore you to come and help, because I don't want to be that parent that has regrets because my child got hit and I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything. I don't want I'm sorry's after the fact. I'm not going to bury my child because it was, unsafe for the bus to turn down a paved city road. Help us figure out how to best keep our children safe. Thank you.
If you could please,
Is this the same route as with
Yes,
the other
sir.
gentleman? Okay,
Yes, sir.
all right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. The next item up is 5A, and I turn this over to Ms. Jeffrey for the Strategic Education Committee.
Is this on? Update regarding priority initiatives.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. In the gray folder that's at your places, there's a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, or you can follow along in your board docs if you would like, whichever is better for you.
Bring down the screen and then I'll pull it back up.
All right.
So to be clear, this is the one?
Yes, ma'am. The title says Board Directives. It probably should say Board Priorities. Okay, just to give you an idea of what I'm going to review with you, I'm just going to go over a little bit of the rationale for change, then an overview of where we've been for the past few months, what got us to this point, the board priorities that were laid out, the feedback that we've received to date, and the work underway. So the first question is, why change anything? I think it boils down to the three purposes of public education. The first is a moral imperative that brought most of us to this work. It's the same value that the forefathers wrote in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In our society, education is the fundamental key that unlocks access to opportunity. In America, ever since the beginning of public education in the Massachusetts colony in the 1600s, education has been seen as the cornerstone of democracy. It's what prepares young people to be contributing members of their society in a democratic republic. And then finally, in current times, it's an economic necessity. There's a 7 million job gap across the country. We know what that's like here in our region. We're living in a high-skill, high-knowledge era, and too many of our children are unable to access living wage jobs. We have a preponderance of children who receive free and reduced lunch. They could close that poverty gap if they could simply access the high-skilled jobs that are in our area, and they cannot do that if they cannot access the best that we have to offer in education. Additionally, when we were accredited for the first time a year ago in the fall of 2018, the accreditation agency told us that if we did not make improvements in certain areas, they would not keep our accreditation current. That is extremely, extremely important if your child is applying to a college from Charleston County Schools. So if we look at, this is just a snapshot from one page in the accreditation report. I think there were actually 12 standards under the learning capacity area, and we did not meet 6 of them. So the first one that's listed here, 2.1, learners have equitable opportunities to develop skills and achieve the content and learning priorities established by the system. The last one on that page, 2.5, educators implement a curriculum that is based on high expectation and prepares learners for the next level, is another area where we fell woefully short. That study simply confirmed what we had heard in 1998 in the Harvard professor's study, the Clemson Equity and Inclusion findings, the recommendations of the Shared Future Group, and the recommendations that we heard last spring from the Mission Critical Actions. The thing that we need everyone to understand is our financial situation. So the next slide, if you're looking at your packet, is from the study that was published on October 3rd here in South Carolina. This is a study about how to create equity across the state. And the bottom line for all of us to understand is Charleston County is the biggest loser in that effort. So they proposed staffing. I put some of the statistics in here. The first couple bullets are about school administrator and school staff, but the third bullet, 1 media specialist for every 685 students, 1 guidance counselor for every 350 students, 1 nurse for every 600 students, and 1 resource officer for every 640 students. That would be the allocation that would be funded from the state, and Charleston County will be in a situation where we will not be permitted to raise local revenue if we want to do something different. In the equitable redistribution, Charleston County Schools is shown as being more than 250 school positions over the allotted amount. There are 4 different scenarios in that study. In the least damaging scenario, we lose almost $50 million, $49 million and change. That's the best scenario. In the worst case scenario, Charleston County loses $100 million. And even if nothing happens with the funding formula in South Carolina, if the legislature chooses to do nothing, this district hits a funding cliff or a ceiling. In 2 or 3 years, we will not be able to keep all the staff we have. We will not be able to offer any further pay raises to teachers. We will not be able to expand programs. We will not be able to bring additional opportunities to small schools that are currently not getting the same curricular offerings as other schools. That is a hard fact of life, which causes us to have to make some changes, whether we want to or not. If you're looking at your packet, I put 2 pages in there that I thought that are extracted from this study so that you could see precisely what I'm talking about. The first page shows that we're 224 teachers over the allocation, that we are listed as 21 guidance counselors over allocation. We're listed as 3.4 media specialists over allocation, and at the school level, 26 administrators over allocation. Those would be primarily assistant principals who are helping with a lot of the operational and disciplinary needs. The next page shows you the best case scenario, and that's the page that shows you that Charleston County stands to lose $49,624. So that the link for that study is there. We sent it to you last week. I doubt you've had time to look at it yet, but it addresses equity, not adequacy.
To be clear, can you tell the public what this report is and who has it right now?
The report is called the Education Funding Study, and you can find it on the governor's page. You can find it on the State Department of Revenue's page. It's
And
easy.
isn't it at the Senate subcommittee? Wasn't it presented to the Senate Education Subcommittee?
Yes, thank you. To answer more precisely, the governor and the head of the House of Representatives and the Senate asked Frank Rainwater to convene a committee and complete the study and present it to the governor and the legislature. That was the work that the legislature asked last year to be completed. Thanks. Did that answer your question better? Okay. So we get to the next section. We're going to review sort of the work to date, how we got here. So in the fall of 2018, we were receiving our accreditation report. Again, it's the first time we've ever been accredited. Our accreditation came with warnings that the board must address certain areas, and if we do not, we will not be accredited next time around. Right after that, then, we began to work in earnest. In December, the board had the 24 different goals. We collapsed those into a few high-leverage initiatives, improved middle school options, feeder pattern alignment, finding highly skilled leaders to lead our schools, especially a lower-performing school, better supports for students who are disrupting learning, and programs in use elsewhere that were producing better results than some of the programs we were using. So we formed these facilitating groups that would meet with communities in North Charleston, the Peninsula, West Ashley, and Johns Island. They held meetings throughout last spring, and then on June 24th, they brought their mission-critical recommendations, their findings, to the board. The administration also made some recommendations to the board that day, and on June 24th, the board approved actions were to bring recommendations back to the board regarding magnet and choice by October 2019, and one of the driving concerns was the lack of equity, access, and demographic representation in our magnet and choice programs. The second action was to expand student access to mental health counselors or other socio-emotional supports. That has certainly been done. Congratulations to the staff who wrote that grant. We're one of 13 districts in the country to receive the $5 million to support that effort. The third, arrange cultural competence training for all personnel by August. That's underway, and you'll hear a report from Mr. Kennedy on that in November. And then finally, develop a process to receive proposals for effective school approaches. So these reports that I'm just going to hold up should look familiar to you. These are the kinds of reports you received. You set some clear board directives last spring. Then on June 24th, we narrowed down our recommendations based on the community reports that were coming to you. And then in August, we brought a list of directives and timelines that look like this. So the next thing that you'll see here is just a screenshot from this timeline that you received in August. The first directive, we were to establish school-level explicit and measurable expectations, which has been done. Define the readiness pathway, the metrics, the process, so we know who is ready and who is not ready, and can have some very clear intents about how to close the readiness gaps. Simplify those individual student scorecards for every child. You'll hear more about that today. We did that work in December. On Election Day, November 4th, teachers will be meeting with parents to actually put this whole process in place. Directive 2 was to make sure all of our personnel were aware of those expectations before school started. And then we go on to the next page. You asked us to look at high impact indicators with respect to our new expenditures, and we reported that to you at the last meeting. Directive 9, solicit effective innovative school management approaches for partnerships, not charter consideration. That was the solicitation for interest. Reverend Collins, you were asking about that Friday. We discussed that on August 26th and brought you an example of the solicitation for interest. You all remember you talked about what date we should ask for feedback on. That woman decided it should be by October 4th. And we, rather than hire someone to coordinate our charter schools, said that we would repurpose that position and hire or contract for someone to really help with this whole effort of trying to find the right approaches to more rapidly accelerate achievement, student well-being in some of our schools. Directive 10 was about the district's capacity to execute mission critical, changing the board agenda format to focus more of our meeting time on student well-being, establish processes to engage parents, educators, and employer representatives as we consider these changes, and then schedule the first and second round of meetings, which was done. And then by the end of September, we were to start bringing recommendations on the magnet and school choice changes. By January, then bring to you the school facilities modifications that would have to happen. So that's just sort of a reminder of how we got to this place. So on September 16th, we brought to you the board priorities. We focused on 5 of them: all children ready for first grade. We focused on all children having access to high-quality, equitable program offerings. Under that one, we talked about the absolute necessity of bringing enrollments to our schools, to at least 500 students at elementary and more like 600 in our middle schools. The next priority we talked about was fair representation of our diverse student population in special programs. Backing up, as has been suggested in the public comments, to make sure that more of our children are being nurtured along the way, so making sure that all of our schools serve at least 5% of the students in the gifted programs, looking at the electives that are available for our middle school students where we have enough enrollment to make that feasible. And then the third and fourth bullets got at the student population revisions at Buist and Academic Magnet to make sure that the student body more closely represents the diversity of the district. And in order to do that, the idea on the table at that time was to expand by 1 class per grade the number of seats at Buist, which would require Buist to be located on 2 sites, and it would also require, in that expansion, to come up with some different way of, or some way, we don't have a way, of determining a fifth grader who's eligible or a sixth grader who's eligible. So that's work under progress. And I'm going to skip to the fifth recommendation because it fits under this one. That was the recommendation about partial magnets. So we've heard some talk about that. So what's been happening? We've had these listening sessions. So far, we've conducted listening sessions in the Baptist Hill area, the North Charleston area, the James Island area, and downtown. The following slides, most of you have been to those listening sessions. This just lays out for you again those proposals that we put on the table for consideration at the listening sessions. The first set of proposals were about the early learning, 4K and 5K. Funds permitting, we suggested making District 4 the first area that would receive universal 4K education. In D4, creating 3 early childhood and family engagement centers, one at Mary Ford, one at probably Goodwin, and one at the Ladson Elementary when we build a new Ladson. In downtown, we talked about rezoning some elementary schools, but making sure that we maximize the number of early childhood seats here. Also increasing the number of seats in Districts 9 and 23. So I won't walk through all of these proposals. We did meet in each constituent area, and these are the slides that we shared. In District 23, in District 4, the first few bullets just repeat what we saw about early childhood education, and then we talked about the latter bullets, bullet number 5, establishing a master's residency program at a North Charleston Elementary School. That would be a program where there's an expert teacher and a novice teacher. We work with an institution of higher education to make sure that the novice teacher is learning from a master and taking college courses. So within a span of 2 to 3 years, the novice teacher would receive a master's degree by working in partnership with an institution of higher education. Involving parent representatives in reviewing the solicitations for interest, looking at middle schools. We talked about Morningside and the need for a Meeting Street Middle School, and opening a state-of-the-art career and technology center next year. D20, we have heard about these recommendations. I'll just say a bit about the first one, the Arts Infused program at Sanders Clyde. So we would expect that this year we would recommend an investment in Sanders Clyde in the arts that's similar to the investments that the board makes in Ashley Rivers, the Ashley River Creative Arts Elementary, and in the North Charleston Creative Arts Elementary, because we've not done that at Sanders Clyde. And then the rest of these proposals on the peninsula we've talked about and we've had a lot of public comment on. So what's the feedback generally? We boiled it down into these main points. The Minnie Hughes community members who attended the D23 session are opposed to combining the 192 students at Minnie Hughes with the 362 students at E.B. Ellington. If those two were to combine on the E.B. Ellington site with some new construction there, it would make an elementary school of an ideal size. It would be about 554 students, and that gets us inside that allocation formula to put the whole system of supports. It's not quite what the state recommends, but it's a lot closer than those two schools are at the current time. The Charleston Development Academy supporters who spoke like their schools as they are and oppose change. Some have privately offered thoughtful alternatives, and that's not just Charleston Development Academy, it's Buse, Meminger, Mitchell, Charleston Progressive, and Charleston Development. Those who were present at the meetings and spoke like their schools and don't want them to change. Privately, some very reflective parents have said, we don't think that will work quite that way, but here's an idea, would you be willing to consider this? The third bullet, we heard loudly and clearly that some neighborhoods have very fragile and complex social ecosystems, that the school holds a very special place in the community, connecting the interdependencies of housing, education, family, nonprofit organizations, and other extended support mechanisms, and we need to be very, very careful before we disrupt those kinds of connections. Next bullet, there are concerns about some of the partial magnet recommendations, and we have sent those back to the committee that's working on that. Next bullet, there's some opposition to and some misunderstanding about the proposed partnership schools. And the final bullet that we felt deserved this level of generalized summary is several parents and educators asked that we reconsider the concept of locating multiple middle school programs on one campus. That does not seem to be an idea that resonates with people or that they can imagine working. And we will readily admit it wouldn't work well without the right leader there all the time. So what are we doing now? Here's the work underway with respect to those 4 priorities, and then we'll talk about the solicitation for interest in just a minute. So we're holding listening sessions as well as some small group meetings in the community. Coming up are, someone asked a little bit ago, tomorrow night at Hot Gap Middle School, Wednesday night at Lang Middle School, next Tuesday at St. James Santee up in District 1, and next Thursday, the 24th at 6 p.m. at West Ashley High School. We are on the verge of contracting with some individuals to help with these board directives, particularly with the solicitation for interest. We're interviewing for the Chief Academic Officer position this week. When we hire that position, that will give us a little more capacity. We're continuing to work multiple plans and scenarios for D20 and other schools. We are engaging some small groups of representative parents and teachers to come together to look at some different options. We're exploring the feasibility of converting Mary Ford Elementary to a preschool and a family engagement center for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds as early as next year. We'll be consulting with some parent representatives as we consider the best way forward on that. We're meeting this week with the planning group from the College of Charleston about creating that advanced academic studies program that we have mentioned. They are very interested in doing that to serve schools in underserved areas of the district at the secondary level. Continuing, today we're bringing up just an early draft of possible changes to academic magnet enrollment criteria. We will not be asking you to vote on that today. We have a lot of conversation to have yet around one of the issues that was mentioned today, how we make sure that we offer access and that we don't put children in a situation at Academic Magnet where they're unable to enjoy and respond to the academic rigor. We're considering a lot of options for BUST. So if we want to move forward with the board's plan to diversify BUST without lowering the quality of the learning that occurs there, we have a couple of options. The first is to add 1 grade per class using enrollment criteria with features similar to those that will be proposed or developed for Academic Magnet for the upper grades, because we would have to figure out how we add 1 class per grade. We're seeking advice about the appropriate screening processes for kindergarten. That's separate from upper grades. Assuming we add 1 grade per class, BUST will have to expand to another site. So there are several different options on the table, and we could consider some different grade configurations. K3 at one site, 4-8 another, K4 and 5-8, K5 and 6-8. There could even be some other conceivable configurations, but that does require that we think about Charleston Progressive, about Memminger and Mitchell. All of a part as we think about where students can best be served. So a different option that would not be at all what parents would want would be to remove the countywide magnet status and return students who are academically capable to their constituent districts if there are schools in their constituent districts that are serving peers that are at the same level of academic advancement. Because we do have some schools in the county that are serving students at the same kind of academic levels and challenges as BUST. BUST would then serve D20 students, plus students from other areas of the district that don't have access to schools that have that sort of academic gifted program in place. So this could be accomplished without having to move to 2 campuses, but if we don't, if we expand 1 grade one class per grade, we've got to go to 2 campuses. So as I said, we have a small group that will be gathering to look at some of those options. We're still exploring the option of placing some of the Montessori middle school programs on one campus so that we can improve the opportunities for those students. It's darned hard to get all of the middle school electives to 76 kids across grades 6, 7, and 8. So work underway with Priority 4. Priority 4 was about the partnership school zone, and what's listed on this slide were the original bullets that we brought to you. We pointed out that partnership schools are not charter schools, and they're not an effort to privatize schools, but that each school would have a contract with the board. The board remains in full control of that school under the terms of whatever contract you would develop and a majority of board members would vote on. So we think the title has been problematic. We first started with an idea of an innovation zone. We've had one of those in Charleston County School before, so that seemed confusing. Then we thought about opportunity zone, but that's the same term the federal government is using. We used partnership schools, but that became confusing because it sounded to some people as though we were expanding the only partnership school we have. And so perhaps the term is acceleration schools, but the point is the expectation is clear. These schools have greater autonomy, but they have greater responsibility. We expect them to accelerate the rate of student well-being, academic growth, and academic achievement more than their counterparts. That would be the whole point of trying to make some very significant changes in the way these schools are structured. The next slide you've seen before, it points out the nationwide gap between the learning levels of children who come from impoverished backgrounds. That's a general stereotypical statement, and those who don't. That doesn't always hold true, but generally it does. Someone sent the board members an article from the Wall Street Journal last week that summarized a Stanford study that showed the same thing, that across this country, students in poverty are at least 1.5 grade levels behind students not from poverty, regardless of race. And it showed that in very, very segregated systems like Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, there was as much as a 5 grade level gap between students of poverty and students of non-poverty. That's why that early childhood program is so important. It's so critically important to get the 3-, 4-, 5-year-old program right and get more children entering first grade ready to read. When we look at our Charleston County schools, the one that is bringing the most children from poverty to higher levels of literacy happens to be Meeting Street Academy. Meeting Street has not applied to run any more schools in the district. For some reason, this is upsetting to a lot of people. But as you'll recall, this slide shows on the bottom row, the red represents children in poverty. On the top row, the blue represents the percentage of children who scored meet and exceed in reading and math. So as you look across there, the one school that's brought more children from poverty, the bottom circle, to readiness and above on South Carolina Ready is Meeting Street. Some schools are making progress and others aren't making much progress, but Meeting Street has consistently made progress. These are our data that we downloaded from the South Carolina Department of Education website, and this represents achievement of math and reading added together. But because I started with that slide, I think it caused a lot of people to think that a partnership school would only be that kind of school. So we want to share with you and with the public the respondents that we've had so far to the solicitation for interest. There are 9 of them. Arts Now, which is a nonprofit wanting to work with Angel Oak Elementary. Distinctive Schools is a school system that works in other states. Engaging Creative Minds is Sanders Clyde. Intermediate is a local LLC that's applied. Metanoia, we all know, is a local nonprofit, and they want to open the area's only A-rated National Association for Education of Young Children accredited early learning center, and they're opening at the old Chicora Elementary. a group, a nonprofit group called Noble Education Initiative, and some of these are charter schools. If you Google them, you'll see they're charter schools in other places. That teacher residency lab that we talked about, the College of Charleston wants to operate with us and has submitted a solicitation of interest. The University of Virginia is interested in working with us in leadership in 3 turnaround schools, and then another organization called Ventures in Education, PLA. So what's the next step? The next step is to look at examples of waivers that these kinds of schools that would be in an acceleration zone could get. They could get waivers from school calendar requirements, so students could start school before the 3rd Monday in August. They get waivers for more flexible use of instructional time and use of virtual instruction to better customize student learning. They can get exemptions from teacher certification requirements for subjects such as the virtual programs, career and technology education. A lawyer could actually teach law in the schools without having to go back and get an educator's degree. World languages is another area that a teacher wouldn't have to have certification for. So there are certain areas that they can get waivers from the state certification requirements. They could also get waivers from the teacher tenure requirements, and that isn't on here, but I should say that because that is unsettling for some people. This board would have to approve that first, but if this board approves it, the state board could approve it, and that could be used. So it is whatever freedom, degrees of freedom, this board would be willing to grant a school in order to allow it to demonstrate that it can reach more children and accelerate their well-being more quickly than the approaches we're currently using. District staff is reviewing these proposals for compliance with the solicitation requirements. If someone submitted an application but didn't meet the requirements, they'll be ruled out. Then we'll form stakeholder committees to vet the potential partners. They may want to make visits to some of those schools that are located in other places. We're onboarding an experienced leader, as I mentioned, to head this initiative. We'll update the board in November and then bring to the board for action any applications that are recommended by the administration and by parent and educator representatives from the schools that are being considered. So that's the update on where we are with the board priorities.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or discussion? Reverend Collins.
A couple of things. Thank you for taking the board directives, Superintendent. The plan sounds promising, but I think you have difficulty implementing it, only because it's so massive. It's district-wide, with so many things to implement at one time or one after another. I don't see how you let the staff or even the time and resources to get it all in place. My approach would be that if you're going to make some changes, start with simple changes, 1 or 2 at a time, get that going first, see how that does, and then try something else. Sometimes when you attack the whole problem like that, you create more chaos and confusion than anything else, and lose support for it. So that's that first thing I would say. I don't know if you want to respond back or not.
Well, they're board directives, so.
Yes, it does. Okay. The other thing is, you mentioned about making Mary Ford an early Head Start Center, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And I brought to the board's attention earlier this year several times that currently in our Head Start program, we're underfunded, and we're about 40% of the positions not being filled. So I don't know how creating a new program is going to fix the problems when the old problems that still exist, that we're still short-staffed and underfunded and unsuccessful. So how would putting it in a new location resolve that? If you could answer that, please.
Well, I would agree that simply changing a program that's not working to a new location wouldn't work, so there'd have to be significant changes made to the program. And that might require some funding, that we need to rethink how we're putting it together, which children we're serving, how many we're serving, and what programs, and whether or not we have the right children, the most needy children in the programs.
Wouldn't it be better to address what we have currently first and get those positions filled and get the resources in place and then move forward from there?
So both things, one does not preclude the other. There is work with the current programs, but we haven't allocated additional money to put the federal government's money.
Thank you. This is a time for questions. Ms. Coates, or I think Todd, did you have a question? Oh.
So the solicitation for interest for the applicants, at the bottom of page 25, there's a statement about recommend taking additional applications through December. I'd like the board to talk about that before that's done, just because we have some groups to look at. Maybe afterward, we want to see if we want to go somewhere else. But I'd ask that we kind of hold true to that deadline. And the second thing, and this will probably end in a question, but one of the reasons we were so very specific in the June meeting that we wanted a solicitation for interest was that it wouldn't have to follow the RFP process. So I'm a little concerned about page 26. Page 27, only in that is an RFP process. Other than the stakeholder committees, that's how you RFP something. And I wanted the board to see all of the recommendations, to spend time studying all of these different groups, rather than having the district bring to us here are the applicants we want you to approve or not approve. So I would still encourage you to remember it's not an RFP process, and let us see those actual applications.
Surely, yes, I would be happy that it's a folder about like this, but we can unbind them and send them to you. That we have no problem with that. It wasn't intended to be exclusionary.
That would be something I would look forward to with our Friday update.
But the history too, also the resume.
Excuse me, Mr. Hollington.
Question, a couple of comments. One, I know you're, and no offense, that we talk about Meeting Street and its achievements, but even when you look at the scores, they're still struggling in math. But, in reading, they excel. And I still say it's a new program, even though it's making some strides. To put all our eggs in one basket, to say that that's the answer, I still think the district can still put forth effort in improving education for African American students. The other thing, in the city of Charleston, when you're talking about changing the footprint downtown and expanding Buse, well, the current situation, academic structure in the city, how does that allow diversity when some of the children may not be meeting that standard? And then just for example, that we expanded the kindergarten, which did not allow any enrollment for African American students whatsoever, in the expansion of that. So I'm just wondering, being at the pocket of imprint of people downtown and the fluctuation of one to the other, what does that benefit African American students? Because I just don't see it. Maybe I got to look at that a little bit more. And I just think, and I guess you said co-privatizing of some of our schools and contracting out. If we do that, how does that affect in general staff? If we're obligating to other entities, or we're going to reduce our staff on Calhoun Street to fit in the footprint of the budget to operate this entity, that's one thing. And I do understand about the waivers, and that's, like I said, that's what they did in Georgia, and that's how they yielded a lot of success in Georgia. About action for academic waivers to be able to instruct kids. Thank you, Ms. Jeffrey.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I would like the superintendent to address a couple of his questions. Would you mind doing that?
Just very quickly, just because if you look at the students who chose to come to Buse this year, you may not see diversity. That doesn't mean there weren't qualifying children whose parents chose not to send them to Buse. There were. several children who qualified who chose not to attend. And I've said we have to change the kindergarten, regardless of whether we were doing anything else, we have to change the assessment approach that we were using. So that has to happen anyway. And
I'm sorry, that chiming
You
was
repeat
getting on my
that?
nerves.
Sorry about that, I apologize.
I said,
Phone off,
I repeat that, I couldn't, that chiming distracted me.
And what I'm trying to do is to time people, because we've all got 2 minutes, so I apologize. I'm not receiving phone calls up here.
She was good right there.
Excuse me. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Yeah.
I said it would be incorrect to assume that the kindergarten assessment process for Buist didn't yield any diversity for Buist. It recognized children of color who, several children of color whose parents chose.
Well, you're back when you need you.
Stop. We're under attack.
Irritated.
We apologize, Reverend.
I'm sorry.
So your assumption is wrong. There were diverse children who were identified in the process, several as I understand. We don't know that when we select names. We don't ask race, but not all of their parents chose to send them to Buist. So there is that. Secondly, if we expand Buist, we have to expand using the same sort of idea that's being proposed for Academic Magnet, that we look at underrepresented areas and make sure that we are allowing very academically capable children from those areas to enter as well. We haven't had an allotment or a distribution formula before, so we have to look at that. And regardless of whether any changes occur at Buist, the kindergarten test will not be used again. It's not correct to test 4-year-olds in that manner.
Oh, yes. Dr. Postwait, when we talked about the early learning, like at Mary Ford, didn't we talk about, I think this would be different than Head Start, I may be wrong, that we were discussing having certified teachers for all 4-year-old kids, or are we doing that now?
Well, we did. Head Start is primarily 3-year-olds, and it's federal government. It's very highly regulated, and this district tried to make a go of Head Start, make things work. And we're looking at that. We have 1 year left on our contract with Head Start, so we'll be looking at whether or not to renew that contract, at whether we're the best partner. If we're the best partner, we've got to run it a little differently, or else we have to put more funds with it than are currently being allocated. But we're looking at certified teachers in the 4- and 5-year-old program that we're thinking about for Mary Ford. But because the 3-year-old program has 1 year's contract left on it, we would, of course, continue that and try to make sure that we staff in the centers that are most urgent with qualified people who are there every day. So we don't dispute that there are changes that need to be made. The big question is, should we be the ones to continue the Head Start contract? There are 1 or 2 community entities that think they might be better situated to contract with Head Start than we.
Priscilla, can I ask one more question? My biggest concern with well, not the biggest, my second most important concern is that if Mary Ford becomes a Head Start center or early child development center, and then in that area we lose another school. We created one school for Meeting Street for those same kids several years ago, and then we turn around and close Burns down and put Burns and the new kids are 3- and 4-year-olds coming into Burns, and then now we'll lose Mary Ford, so that's like losing 3 schools in that one area that serves those children, which are all, when they come out of that earliest Head Start at Mary Ford, then their elementary school options would be either Meeting Street Academy if they're accepted in there, or they have to go further down to Lambs or Hunley Park. But you basically wipe out those schools in that area that's been serving those communities for many years.
Right. So I indicated we'd be working with parents. I think we've already, first of all, if they live in the Burns elementary attendance area, they don't have to be accepted. They have to go to Burns. That's their attendance area. But Mr. Barowie has looked again at those figures, and we think probably Shakora is the better site, rather than, so we can keep those children neighborhoods together rather than splitting them 2 directions. that Shakura would be the school to serve the first through fifth graders. But that is still all under discussion. We're
I
working
hope
with
I hope it's stay in this discussion, because I'm not ready for it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to school report cards, state test results.
And we've lost internet, so if you've got handouts,
Yeah.
we'd appreciate it.
Okay, well, it's right there in front of you in PowerPoint.
Yeah. I should have a hard copy anyway. I think.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Reverend Mack, Ms. Vice Chair Darby, Board of Trustees members, and Superintendent Postaway. We appreciate you providing us some time today to share some information about our school report card and state test results. Before we get started, we'll just quickly introduce ourselves and our roles, and we'll start at the end with Ms. Randall.
Good afternoon. Sharon Randall. I work with the secondary learning community.
Jennifer Coker, Department of Alternative Programs and Services.
Our Great Day Joe Williams Middle Schools.
Emily Woody, Curriculum and Instruction. And good afternoon, Michelle Simmons, Elementary Schools.
And I'm Buffy Roberts with the Assessment and Evaluation Department. On October 1st, the state released school and district report cards and the embargo related to this data, with the exception of the ACT national and state score reports, which we know will be released on October the 30th. Today, we'll be reviewing some of the achievement data related to this release and provide some insight into how we are impacting positive change within our system. The main point about our achievement data, we are improving by most measures, but our challenge, like schools everywhere, is to accelerate the growth of children in poverty and also with the readiness gaps within our subgroups. We'll be disciplined in our presentation so that we'll have time for questions. All right, some highlights about our state report card. CCSD was actually able to increase the number of excellent rated schools by 4 this year, and our excellent and good rated schools increased by 7, and our average and above schools increased by 9. CCSD was also able to decrease the number of unsatisfactory schools by 11, with only 3 schools now falling into this category. Moreover, all 14 schools that were rated unsatisfactory last year were able to move out of the unsatisfactory and up at least 1 overall rating level. 41% of our schools improved their overall rating level from last year, and 84% of schools either sustained their overall rating or improved their overall rating. 60% of schools were able to improve their overall rating points on this 100-point scale that's provided by this rating system. It's also very important to note that more than half of our CCSD middle schools have an excellent or good rating for the 2018-19 school year. Moreover, 25 CCSD schools were recently named Palmetto Gold and Palmetto Silver award winners for 2018 and 19 based on high levels of academic achievement and/or growth.
High schools. The high school report cards, we note that on the left-hand side, we have the highest rated high school in the state, Academic Magnet. Last year, we had 2 unsatisfactory high schools. This year, we have no unsatisfactory high schools. Last year, we had 46% of our 13 high schools that scored average or above on the state report card. This year, we've moved to 62% of our high schools earning average or above, and our goal for next year is at least 77% of our high schools scoring average or above.
Already on the middle schools. As Buffy said earlier, the majority of our middle schools are excellent or good as far as ratings are concerned. Also, on last year, we had 1 unsatisfactory middle school, and this year we do not have any. Some great celebrations, or huge celebrations, is that we have the number one and number 2 schools in the state, with Buse being number 1 and Moultrie being number 2, but also Moultrie being the number 1 neighborhood school in the state as well. Like I said, on last year we had 1 unsatisfactory school, and this year we do not have any. And all of our schools that are rated below average are at least 1 to 2 points away from being average. So next year, our goal is to have no schools that are rated below average. are unsatisfactory. Need to clarify that.
And at the elementary level, the majority of elementary schools are on that spectrum from average to excellent. Of note, last year, 11 elementary schools were rated unsatisfactory. All 11 of those schools moved at least one level to below average. 2 moved to average, from unsatisfactory to average. So that's huge for the elementary learning community. Only 3 out of 48 elementary schools are rated at the unsatisfactory level. We're going to go into a deeper dive into the categories, starting with the percentage of students scoring met or exceeds on SE Ready at grades 3 through 8. Overall, we saw improvement in our ELA results. More and more CCSD students are demonstrating readiness or proficiency. You'll notice at grades 5 and 6, that indicator more or less remains static. Not a lot of movement, but in the grand scheme of things, we saw overall growth in ELA. And again, in math, the percentage of students scoring meets or exceeds, we saw an overall increase in the number of students demonstrating readiness. There was a dip at grade 6, but in the larger scale, we are gaining traction in the number of students meeting and exceeding grade level expectations. The next slide breaks down ELA performance by ethnicity. And you will notice that the gaps in performance that we have had in place continue to be an issue. And so we understand that we have grown, but there remains to be an area for growth in terms of subcategories, subgroups, in terms of the number of students performing in the other category, Hispanic, African American categories as well. And math is almost a mirror image of that ELA slide, in that our subgroups, our smaller indicators are not moving as fast as we would like. And so the big picture is that we're growing. You'll see in almost every category outside of Hispanic, there was a positive, there was a plus, but we know that we have a lot more work to do. This particular slide highlights the same message that Dr. Postlewaite alluded to a few minutes ago, that poverty, more so than ethnicity, creates the readiness and the preparation gap that we're working really hard to speak to in terms of early childhood programs, getting more and more students entering kindergarten and first grade ready to learn. So that sense of urgency around fortifying our pre-K programs is that more paramount for us.
All right, so Ms. Simmons just covered some data on our state assessment surrounding math and English. And now I would like to cover some data on our science and social studies state assessments, which are called SC Pass. So I want to clarify that I'll remind you all that for our science and our social studies assessments, this accounts for 10% of the school report card's overall grade, okay? So let's focus on science first. And then looking at science, another thing I would like to remind you all of is the fact that on last year, the state assessed grades 4, 6, and 8 on SC Pass for science. This year, for 2019-2020, we will only be looking at grades 4 and 6, right? So at a first glance, when we look at our science data, we see that across the board, unfortunately, we did go down in our science scores for grades 4, 6, and 8. And looking at our data overall, what we did determine is the fact that we have made some progress in English and mathematics, like Michelle alluded to earlier, but we know there's still room for improvement. And with that being said, we can attribute the lagging data for science and social studies as well to the fact that we still have some grounds to make up. More specifically, because in both the science and social studies texts, there are portions of those assessments that are very text heavy. And of course, you need those reading skills to be successful in that area. And also, more specifically with the science, you have some math concepts that need to be utilized as well. So we still have some room, some growth to make in those areas, reading in our English and math, so we know that we can attribute that to our science and social studies scores. When we look at the ethnicity piece, again, we do have a gap when we look at our African American group. We did see, although, with our science that from 2017, 2018 to 2018, 2019, that our African Americans did grow a little bit in science. Not a lot, but a little, so we'll take that. But again, we understand we have some gaps, and we're continuing to work on those things. To clarify some things about social studies, we will not be taking the social studies assessment on this school year, just to remind you all. But last year, in looking at our social studies data, again, we did go down across the board, or we did decline across the board. And again, as I mentioned earlier, knowing that we have some room for improvement in our math and our English, that we can attribute that once we as we continue to make the growth, that we'll see some differences in our social studies scores. And we see sort of the same thing happening when we break it down by ethnicity, but we do see a difference here where we did make more gains across the board in social studies. But again, our African American group, we have the largest amount of scholars that are in that does not meet category.
Moving on to high school end of course examinations, which count 25 to 30% of the report card. In this particular category for the report card, this is a measurement of students who graduate looking back, in some cases, 2 to 4 years when they took the end-of-course test. So it's not last year's data necessarily. It's last year's graduating group looking back when they took their EOC scores. So looking at the percentages across from 18 to 19, the percentages of students scoring C or higher in English increased 2.4%. In algebra, it decreased 7%. In biology, it decreased 3.4%, and U.S. history increased 0.9%. But again, these are tests from 2, 3, 4 years ago in some cases. The next page looks at last year's EOC data for all students who took it last year. So that's the distinction between these two slides. So looking at all the kids who took the EOC for this last school year in the different areas, you see how we compare to the state level in the same areas. So for U.S. history, we're 7.6% above the state, biology 6.3%, English 3.4%, and algebra 9.3% above the state level. Then we get into looking at the individual areas for algebra, again looking at all kids taking it. And let me note, if there are gains, we will see the benefit of this in, again, 2, 3, or 4 years when these kids graduate. So looking at the Algebra 1, you notice that we increased in every ethnicity area and overall by 2 points. So we are very happy about these gains in algebra and hope those continue every year. And they will benefit us in the future when these kids are graduating. Looking at the next one for biology, we didn't have as high gains in this area. Overall, we were a negative 4.3. Note that we are implementing common assessments across the board at the high school level, and we are going to use those common assessments to check 3 things. Are teachers teaching grade level standards? Are students learning those grade level standards? And which students are not who need real-time reteaching to be sure that they are? So with these targeted interventions in place, we hope to see accelerated improvement in this area. English 1 stayed about even with a negative 0.3, but note there was an increase for African American, 0.9 in this area. And again, we expect to accelerate improvement by implementing common assessments across the board. U.S. history, overall negative 0.3. We had some gains in 2 or more races and Hispanic, but again, we want to accelerate that and expect to do so this year. The next page, page 21, gets into the state-assigned ready-to-work assessment, which is WIN. We just finished the 2nd year of implementing this particular test. Before that, it was work keys in place. Looking at the 2-year success rate of students earning silver or above, so we're only looking at the 4 right columns, silver or above, we had an overall increase, you see, from 64.8 to 70.6 of our students earning that silver or above the first time that they took this test. This particular graph only looks at the first-time test takers. So note that in this case. Earning silver or higher indicates that these kids are more likely to graduate and find a job where they earn a livable wage. So this assessment is checking if our kids are career ready. And as it notes, more of our students are career ready in the 2 years that we've been taking this test. The next slide breaks down only the most recent years' data for first-time test takers for WIN by ethnicity. A couple of things I want to note about this. Of course, we have some gaps, but I do want to remind everyone for the report card purposes, it's not just first-time test takers. We can retest our seniors and have found great success this past year in retesting our students on WIN. Most first-time test takers are juniors, and that allows us time to reteach and have them retake the test. The next slide looks at the grad rate. We had some celebrations in this area, especially with African Americans growing almost 3% and overall 0.7%. By targeting our efforts with grade level readiness and ensuring students are taking the right classes to graduate, we know that this will continue to grow at the end of this year. The next slide looks at college and career readiness indicators by race and ethnicity. We had lots of positives in this area. Note the African American category, plus 11% in that area. This combines all the indicators for college and career readiness, anything from military readiness on the ASVAB, workplace readiness through internships, CTE completer pathways, and that WIN assessment, and college readiness, whether it's dual credit coursework, advanced placement, international baccalaureate, ACT, SAT scores, and we're very happy and excited to share these successes overall.
So with all the positive outcomes and improvements that we achieved this year, and we celebrate that, there are still existing areas that continue to lag and are areas that require our time and attention. So how do we respond to that? So as we work to provide principals and leaders with the tools they need to affect change at the building level, continuous improvement is a large part of that effort. And so on last school year, we rolled out this continuous improvement framework, PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, as a way to guide the goals and strategizing that takes place at the building level. Well, this year we want to improve on that process, take it to another level, and so we're committed to anchoring our continuous improvement efforts in disciplined inquiry and monitoring. So the idea is when we implement a strategy or implement an intervention, we are monitoring really quickly so that we can gauge the impact. So the idea is to learn quickly, fail quickly, make adjustments quickly so that we can improve rapidly. So the devastation is not in making mistakes. The devastation is not in course correcting and making adjustments. And so that's our intention, and that's the work that's before us at this time. So we want to talk a little bit about at the elementary, middle, high, and C&I level, as well as Department of Alternative Programs. What are a few of those levers that we intend to impact at the building level? And so for elementary schools, there are 48 of them under our supervision. And so there are some variants from school to school, things that will be unique, particular, and specific to a particular building. But we also believe that there are some standard practices that should be embedded in every school's program. And so we rolled out expectations for every leader, every building, and a few of which include a minimum level of classroom walkthroughs, facilitated professional learning opportunities for teachers and staff, and attention to detail when it comes to curriculum, instruction, and assessment. We also work under a tiered system of support. So every building level person, principal, if you will, has a different skill set, experience level, and developmental needs. And so we are supporting our principals based on where they stand and the type of support we believe will get them to the next level. And then differentiating the professional development. With large groups, like in the elementary learning community, they do not all need the same type of training and professional development. So in our learning community meetings, we make sure that those opportunities are as small, as targeted, and as differentiated as possible. And utilizing the program from the State Department for assisting, developing, and evaluating principals, making sure that that's a comprehensive effort and that we are holding principals accountable and answerable, but also providing them with the supports they need to be successful leaders.
All right, so for the middle schools, we have the same approach with looking at tiered support visits for schools based on multiple data points. And what that means for the middle school level is we have schools that, I have schools that I visit monthly or biweekly. And the next bullet talks about the intentional focus on high-quality learning walks to improve instructional practices in the school. That's something that we've committed to, both me, all of us, myself, Michelle, and Sharon, when it comes to just going through classrooms really quickly. Like Michelle said, you want to always just make sure you think about quick cycles of things, and a learning walk is a quick cycle when you go and just identify what scholars are doing to have an impact on the instructional outcomes in the classroom. Next, we have a flex intervention period. In all Tier 2 schools, I have Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools to provide school-wide intervention for scholars in the building. And the basic concept behind that was the fact that in many of our schools, I hate to use this terminology, but for lack of better terms, those schools are upside down. And when you have a school that's upside down and you try to provide intervention for kids, and the majority of your kids are not on grade level, it's a school-wide effort to provide those interventions. And so that's what a school-wide flex or intervention period is, where all teachers are hands-on with providing interventions for scholars. And the final thing we have is a focus on addressing depth of knowledge. Again, something that's near and dear to our hearts. The fact that we understand that no matter where a scholar is, we should always challenge those scholars and get them to the higher levels of thinking that we know they are capable of. So.
For the secondary learning community, the biggest lift last year was understanding the report card in extreme minutia. At the most basic level, understanding the requirements that high schools need to work on short and long-term goals, understanding that graduating cohort and how that impacts the report card, understanding things like the work-based learning that many high schools were previously doing didn't count according to the state report card unless there was an additional in-class component that was added to it. The first thing I have up there was effective management. All of this falls under that understanding, and in many cases, looking at what processes and procedures are in place at the school level to ensure that programming was where it needs to be, that the right data was put into PowerSchool, so the schools could receive credit for some of these indicators. For the programming piece, if a child takes 2 CTE courses in a pathway and the third is not offered, then that child doesn't have a chance to be a completer, and so the school would be adversely impacted. In some cases, seniors sitting in classes that would not lead them to graduation. So just cleaning up all of those processes and procedures. Nobody is at fault. It's just a learning curve over time. And the personnel piece, being sure you have the right, strongest teachers in the EOC courses, the remediation and type courses to really push kids. Going back to that short and long-term goal, yes, the graduating cohort scores are vitally important, but if the school isn't working on the bigger picture of improving literacy and getting more kids on grade level, then subsequent years are never going to improve. So it's a two-parter for high schools, immediate needs and also long-term goals. Looking at the next one, instructional leadership. Kudos to principals, school staff at all level, teachers at all level, and every department represented here for everything that all the groups did to help support teachers in growing in their positions and their roles, whether it was PDSA or the effective management piece. Getting the principals to understand their data in the finite, extensive way that they do it now. And what we're embracing this year is quick course corrections, having detailed, clear progress monitoring and making changes in real time to benefit kids. Teaching craft, last year we started, and this year we are doing complete, full common assessments in the core areas. And again, kudos to teachers for embracing that. And we're really looking at student engagement and rigor, the same as Dr. Joe said, for depth of knowledge. And our instructional coaches, I can't thank you enough for your support of that at the high school level. They're already helping in many ways to grow instructional leaders and to support teachers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We all know that students are successful in academics, but there's also a set of non-academic factors that are important to student success, and that's their social emotional well-being in school. And so we have factors around surveys for climate and attendance and discipline on the school report card as well. And so we've, with your help and support, have expanded our social emotional learning curriculum, Second Step, into all first grade classrooms this year. And that now will have 4K, 5K, and first grade. And in 37 elementary schools, but thanks to our Title IV grant, we have also expanded to all the way through 5th grade. All of our middle schools through the Title IV grant have also expanded to using Second Step for grades 6 through 8. Thanks to our mission critical action that was supported last month, we'll be adding social workers and additional climate coach. Those interviews are underway so that we can additionally tier out support to our schools. We have a set of schools that will receive 1 to 2 days a week of social work and coaching support. In conjunction with the grant that Dr. Postlewaite mentioned, that is an additional support in there for 7 of our most needy schools. We've expanded professional development options out of our office. We now have a team in a coordination with multiple departments that are trained to provide trauma-informed educator training, and we continue to offer restorative practice training as well as support teams in their implementation of multi-tiered systems of support and positive behavior intervention and support, as well as classroom management. And finally, with your support and the support of the $5 million grant, we're greatly increasing our mental health supports to students through our partnership with the Charleston-Dorchester Mental Health Department. We are working with them currently to add additional counselors based on the funds that are received. And in some schools, that includes doubling the amount of service they have at this time, but all schools will have access to counseling. And we'll know in a few weeks just how many schools and how many days a week that will all impact.
So when it comes to coaching, last time I sat before you, we were putting a red, a yellow, or a green light to certain things that we were doing in the district. And at the time, before the the embargo was lifted, we put a yellow light next to coaching as being unsure at that point of its actual impact. And today, I'm going to change that light to a green. Based on what you've heard today around the data and what we know is happening in our schools and supporting teachers in job-embedded work, we believe that the instructional coaches are vital to that piece. Ms. Randall's already spoken to the impact that the high school coaches are having, and we expect that that data will continue and that they own a large lift in supporting teachers in that. You've heard several of the things already mentioned that are going on with coaching around progress monitoring and around benchmarks. I just want to say that for this team right here, this is a representation of the alignment that's happening around many things going on in our district. And we know that that alignment, that clarification of expectations, that being relentlessly intentional about staying on top of those are what's changing the outcomes for our students. And we really believe that deeply and are committed to that, not just this group. And I call that out in that last bullet there, that across all of the folks that support schools, doesn't matter what division or department they sit in, the tightening of the alignment is leading to differences. And we believe that those are positive differences and will continue to do that work throughout this year.
We're also enhancing our intentional use of data. With this intentional focus, we're expanding our data sources and types of reporting through our use of our internal data warehouse, Data Central, and our interactive public data center, which allows for filtering opportunities so that users can more easily pinpoint trends and patterns in our data. All of this is important for identifying where our efforts are paying off and where we have opportunities for further exploration and growth. Moreover, we're making data more accessible and available in a variety of formats needed by school and district teachers and leaders to implement positive change in how we are affecting teaching and learning. We are also continuing to expand professional development opportunities and build capacity for robust and useful data analysis for making actionable steps to impact student-learner outcomes. And that's questions for our team?
Thank you so very much. Thank you for all your work and all the other people who are working behind the scenes with you. And I've worked individually with a few of you, and I know that you are the hardest working people that I've seen in a very long time, so thank you. And I think the results are showing us that your work is worth it. Thank you. Questions?
Yes. Okay. So, yes, thank you for the information and the data that has been shared, and we do appreciate and value the work that you have done. But however, my major concern is that we have been talking about closing this achievement gap with Afro-American students comparing to white students. We've been struggling in that area for some time. And the data that is presented is overall. It's fine. But I need to know school A or school B, school C, whoever that may be, where the issue lies to where the gap is wider and we need to focus more into those particular schools. That's important because when you cumbersome the data and the numbers and the percentage, it gives me an overall, but it doesn't tell me that school A in D4 and school B in D3, those are the target point schools to where we're struggling or lagging behind. When we lump the numbers together like this, it is hard to determine where the issue lies. And if we're going to close this gap of Afro-American students and white students, then we have to drill down into the particular schools. And then we have to have that conversation openly to say, this is where the issue lies in these particular schools. And if additional resources have to go into those schools, then that's what we have to do. And I understand we look at formula, we look at equity, we look all of that, but if we're not meeting the target at those particular schools, then these numbers we will continue to see where in Algebra 1 at the end of course exam, where only 20% of the students, and then the following year, just 20.8%. When you compare it to 79, 74, 75%. So that's a huge gap. So where are we drilling down into? I heard someone said earlier we're taking deeper dives into these numbers. Well, tell me deeper dives AB school or ABC school where these issues lie so that we can attack the problems. Now, I'm not beating at you. I thank you for the data. But if we as a board going to make changes and close this gap, then we have to know exactly where the issue lies openly so we can have this discussion. And I'll be honest with you, I am tired of seeing these numbers. I'm tired of seeing the gap the way it is. So we have to find a way of not just talking about it. I mean, the data's good to show it to me, but I need to know details. I need to know what we're going to do differently. And you may not be able to answer this question. It may have to come from the superintendent. But I need to know deeper where we are in making these significant changes today and not tomorrow. That's where I am. That's what I need. And that's what we need to be talking about. It's not a question, it's a comment, but it's going to double back later. So I just hope that you will allow that to fester through as to what I'm looking for and what I'm expecting.
Ms. Coates.
So, echoing what Reverend Mack said, I think one of the first things that jumps out at me is, first off, is early college high school its own school, or are those kids attached to their home schools?
They stay enrolled in their home schools.
Okay, that explains that. But we went through last month some program impact reports, and things that I see that the district presented to us as successful program impacts are sitting in some of the schools that didn't move from last year. So I really do think we need to, that ought to be correlating more. It seems disjointed and disconnected to say this program is a green dot, and then I go look at the 2 schools where you implemented that program, and I see no movement from last year, and they're on the lower end of the spectrum of achievement. So we've got to have some really serious conversations about if you're going to ask me to, clearly the reason the program assessments came is because you're going to ask me to fund them next year. So so when I look at a green dotted program assessment and see it in schools that didn't move the needle, that doesn't make sense to me. If I see a red dotted assessment and you're asking me to expand that or create centralized early childhood without telling us why it didn't work there and how it's going to work here. So I think what Reverend Mack is saying is certainly exactly what needs to be said, but I'll give you a little bit more targeted thing. Go back to your program assessments from last month and tell me why they don't correlate to the schools. The green dots are not correlating to schools. The programs that didn't work, you're proposing expanding. We need to get that tied back together. It doesn't appear to be correlated in any sense.
Mr. Hollingshed?
Thank you. Reverend Mack, I can understand what you're saying, but, until we really take a hard look at that gap, as a parent, as you are, I have tried it many different ways in educating my kids. I've seen good results, and I've seen results I wouldn't even try again. I had an interesting conversation with my son the other day in Columbia at homecoming. He took the practice test, and the comprehension and reading part is the hardest part, which I thought he would fail, and he blew it out the water. Now, he's got to go back and do the math, which he's a genius at math and missed by a few points. But what I'm getting at is, when we deal with children and bridging that gap, you have to understand that kids react to not these red and green dots that we're talking about. They react to knowing that principal cares or that staff cares for them, and then they begin to yield a positive product. Given a good example of Mr. Henry Darby at North Charleston High, who started at a 56% graduation rate and ended up at a 76%, means that he has skin in the game and that he proves and shows that he loves and cares for his student staff. Kids react a lot of times from knowing they see people that look like them, and they know that they can see success in the Joe Williams, that they know started out in a community just like them, and then he went on to a South Carolina State University, and then now successful in the field. Kids can identify and understand and see and touch that. Until we put more of that within the community to show them a success model, we're going to yield a better product. I watched a fight the other day, about a week ago, in the Wayland. I was meeting a parent to pick up some information, and a fight broke out on the bus right in front of me. And I looked at the children, I was like appalled, but then I looked at the children in the environment. I understand. But this is serious.
I know.
But I looked at the children in the environment that they're in. And then I began to talk to the children that was after de-escalated in the street. We have got to put them in that environment, and I live there. I see this every day. I don't go dabble in there and go back. No, I live there. We have to put something in place that allows those children to be retooled, to help their parents to get engaged, and to help them understand that we're not abandoning them, we're helping them all together on this train.
Thank you. Mr. Garrett.
Just quickly, I thank you very much for y'all's presentation, particularly with respect to the intentionality and looking into each class, because a lot of these, a school result doesn't mean anything. It comes down to what is happening with each child. But a lot of these school results that goes back to one classroom, that they're not, at our high schools, there are not multiple U.S. history teachers before they get to that class. So I appreciate that intentionality, and I hope, what has been, my 7 years on the board, what's been missing has been a culture of accountability and saying, all right, building leader, what are we doing to improve, to mentor that teacher and to improve the outcome if they're bad. I mean, they're excellent in so many situations, but, and just I would ask y'all, as you're looking towards to the springtime, with recruiting, that you're identifying where we've got our strongest folks, where do we need strong leaders, and then going out and recruiting where there may be gaps there. And just the process starts in December. Be ready to tell us what's going to work and where you need money, because this board has supported whatever has been asked for the last at least 4 years. So, but that's it.
Was that next?
Reverend Collins.
So you can go if you want to. You can go if you want to.
Okay, go next.
Go, quick,
You haven't
go,
spoken yet.
Go, Joyce, go.
I just wanted to see if we could get a time frame on the request from Reverend Mack. I don't know what's reasonable, but I would be interested in hearing, if you have specific information on specific schools, if we could get that. I would not like to leave that hanging out there. So if we could talk about.
Excuse me. There's a 2-hour workshop scheduled before your next board meeting on November 28th from 1:30 to 3:30 to break the individual school results. To look at you. We have
November or October?
I'm sorry, October.
Okay.
28th. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm wishing that away.
28th.
October 28th from 1:30 to 3:30, and we have the experts from Northwest Evaluation Association coming in, and you will see breakdown school by school by school.
Thank you.
Can I tag onto her request? So in that breakdown, of course, you're going to identify some areas of concerns, of greater concerns, correct?
Well, we have identified those
That needs to be
concerns now.
addressed.
Yes, sir.
So when, on the 28th, are we going to be talking about some strong recommendations on some changes that need to happen from that data?
Probably not publicly.
Okay. Oh, just as long as we're going to be ready, prepared for that.
There are probably some personnel changes that we would be talking about privately, and I don't know if we'll have them ready to share with the board in 2 weeks or not, but we will show you the analyses for each school and where we know we have a lot of growth occurring and where growth didn't occur.
And I'd be in favor of doing it, because it immediately a lot of times gets to a person's name. If it needs to happen in executive session, I would hope that we could do that, not as a way of being non-transparent, but as a way to freely discuss it without hurting people's reputations or people thinking, for whatever.
Got it.
Reverend Collins.
Dr. Williams, how you doing? Thank you, panel, for coming out and giving us this information and some good news and some bad news, man. But Dr., what you said about the middle schools overall, is there 11 middle schools?
No.
How many do you have?
We have 19 total.
Okay. And you said, give me the status again, where it's passing, the ones that are successful and not successful again?
So the majority are good or excellent, but we have no unsatisfactory schools. We had one last year, but we don't have any this year. And the ones that are are below average, they're 1 to 2 points away from being average. So if they would have gained that 1 or 2 points, we would have had all of our schools average or above.
Let me ask you about Morningside Middle School.
Mm-hmm.
How's this ranking in the state, South Carolina?
How's their ranking in the state?
Mm-hmm.
Well, their school report card rating is below average. They were unsatisfactory. Last year, they went up 20 points, and now they're below average, and they're 2 points away from being average.
Mm-hmm. So is it true that only 6% are proficient in math?
Say it again, sir?
Is it true that only 6% of the students at Morningside are proficient in math?
If that sounds about right, yes, sir.
All right, and 10% in reading?
Yes, sir.
All right, so that would be one of the lowest performing schools in the state then, would you say?
It could be if you look at overall achievement, but one of the things that the system does now, the school report card rating system does now, it does take into consideration Apology's growth. So as far as overall achievement, yes, sir.
But what about Northwoods Middle. You have about 930 students there.
Reverend Collins, all
It's right
that,
there.
we'll have all that, and then we're going to go into detail on that.
No, this is important what I'm doing now. I need to do this now. He just talked about the report card. This is coming for the report card. So, Northwoods Middle with about 930 students. They're considered average or below average?
They're average.
Okay. Even though only 11% of the students are proficient in math, they're still average with 11% proficient in math?
Yes, sir. Like I said earlier, this system takes into consideration growth, which is the thing that we want to hold principals accountable for. Overall achievement, we know, is a struggle in a lot of our schools. It's been that way traditionally. But if we can show that schools are growing scholars, that means that eventually, as time progresses, and I know time is of the essence, that we'll get those scholars to where they need to be. So that's why this system taking growth into consideration, to me, is a fair system.
So help me understand this. And so the system you're using now, but let me ask you about, did the state change its grading system last year? The way it ranked schools? Did the state of South Carolina change its system?
The way they rated schools?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's a big difference between last year and this year then, right?
No. You said is there a difference?
Yeah, the way they rate schools now, then as opposed to last year.
Last year, they used the same system with the exception of the company that they use for growth. They changed that company. That looks
So
at growth.
you're speaking that's about overall growth then, right?
Excuse me?
You're speaking that's about growth overall?
Not just overall, I'm just saying the only difference in the system from last year and this year, really there's no difference. It's just the company they use to evaluate growth on the report card, they changed the company. So they just used a different company this year to evaluate growth.
Just one more question and I'll be done. Okay, so Zucker Middle School, about 516 students roughly.
Yes, sir.
15% proficient in math and 16% in reading. Is that considered below average or average, or what is the rank?
Their overall rating is average.
So the overall rating, maybe I need to better understand the overall rating in these schools, because I don't understand it myself. If 80% of the kids not on reading level, how can the school be considered average? Unless that represents, I'm almost done. Unless that represents all the schools in the area, that all of them are 80% below proficient. So that's what I'm having trouble understanding.
Dr. Williams would be happy to explain that to you when we're done with the meeting.
This is a question and answering time. I mean, why are you so hurry?
Because some of those questions you can ask before we have this meeting that are specific.
Yeah, like we all know the answer to that. It's because of the growth.
We don't know the answer to these. We have to understand better what it means. I think it's mostly pertaining to growth, but I can stop though. But I think it's good questions. These schools are in North Charleston.
Go ahead.
And these kids need to say.
Reverend Collins, go ahead and answer your question. So you
Can
can
this be the last
So I just want to understand, the report card you're giving, is it based on, I mean, the report card ratings you're giving us, is the overall growth, or is the data for the math and science? I mean, help me understand. I don't understand what you're really giving us that we're doing good at. Because I'm looking at low proficiency in reading and math, but I just want to understand what you're telling us today.
The report card, the way the report card ratings work, schools are rated in various areas. It's not just on the growth measure. You are looking at academic achievement. You're looking at an engagement survey. You're looking at sometimes the EL population specifically. So there are different categories, and I will be happy to sit with you and go through the entire rating system if you would like. I'd be more than happy to do that.
What's your name?
Buffy Roberts.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Individual student readiness report.
Okay.
That's
C. That's correct. Sorry.
6% of mine. Some gas. And I told Chief, bring the whole thing.
Come on to the podium.
We're going to take a 2-minute break.
Okay, all right, got it. We will take a break for 5 minutes then. Everybody be back in here at 3:40. Next item up, yes.
Is individual student readiness
We're gonna
report.
try.
Talk loudly.
Next item up is 5C, individual student readiness.
Thank you.
All right, please go ahead when ready.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Today, we're also going to provide a brief synopsis of the student data conferences and how we are implementing that process within CCSD. All right, what you see on the screen is an at-a-glance overview of the content of those conferences. The Learning Services Division provides professional development resources and data sources, including those school and individual student dashboards, in order to help facilitate the student data conferences. It's important that these conferences are used as a way to open conversations and help build positive home-to-school relationships between our parents and students and teachers. They serve as a way to share the state of the school, current readiness levels of students, goals for students, and specific strategies and steps that parents can take at home in order to help their students achieve their goals. This is a new addition in our student dashboards and our student data conferences, which is our readiness metric. If you'll recall, the readiness metric serves as a way to answer that question of whether my child is ready for their current grade level. It does provide some context for discussing a student's readiness level upon entering a grade, how this relates to their trajectory towards college and career readiness, and what parents, students, and teachers can do together to help a student reach his or her current as well as their future goals. As you can see in the graphic on the screen, it does display the student's grade level readiness in reading and math based on the last spring results. The metric incorporates multiple measures where available in order to allow for more than one opportunity to demonstrate readiness. It then combines them into one simple metric to represent the student's current progress toward college and career readiness. The highest of these measures is actually used to assign the student's overall readiness level as below readiness, approaches readiness, demonstrates readiness, or exceeds readiness. The data table that you'll see below the graphic displays the results for the specific measures that were used within that metric, and it's also color-coded to represent the readiness level of each of those measures displayed. Our school dashboards will also show the same kind of information for elementary and middle. Our high schools are a little bit different. We provide this information through the individualized graduation plan conferences or IGP conferences that are held with school counselors and parents and students. And there's one readiness level for high school, for the high school readiness metric, and that's based on college and career readiness and all of those indicators that you'll see. The information is shared as an additional resource for students and parents to supplement those student dashboards that we provide. Okay, so what do these data conferences look like in schools? We've actually asked some representatives from two of our schools, Harborview Elementary and Zucker Middle School, to join us today to introduce themselves and then share just a little bit about what those data conferences look like in their schools, so you would have an idea of that. So if we could have Harborview come to the podium.
God bless you.
Hello, I am Mark Connors. I'm the principal at Harborview Elementary, and I have Dana Friedman here, a third grade teacher at Harborview Elementary. I've been at Harborview for 5 years now, and over the last couple of years where we've implemented our data conferences, I think it really does, start that positive relationship with parents, really standardizing all the conversations my teachers are having with their parents. So no matter what classroom my teachers go into to have those conferences, they're all walking away with very similar information about where their student stands. And they're getting a really clear picture of where their student actually is, where they're talking about kind of that readiness metric. So, they're seeing, are they on grade level, are they above grade level, or, are they a little behind? And then they're also getting a chance to talk with that teacher about where do they stand? What is our school doing to support those students? What can the parents do at home to kind of support us with the students? So it really just brings a great conversation around that really drives the student achievement aspect of it. I'll let Dana she's the one in the classroom, so she knows exactly how those conversations go.
As Mr. Connors said, I'm a third grade teacher at Harborview, and one of the most important things about these data conferences is kind of breaking it down first for ourselves in order to articulate what our children need individually to our parents. And when we bring the parents in, kind of taking their assessment scores from the last year or the spring, since it's spring to spring growth, and then aligning it with goals for their individual child and how we can make intentional choices in the classroom to meet their educational, academic, and even social and emotional needs, but also developing a partnership so that the parents understand what they can do at home. And our students have diverse needs regardless of the school that you're at, so we need to differentiate our instruction, but also communicate what that looks like to the parents so that they understand that their child is getting an equitable experience in the classroom.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If we could have Zucker come up. And while they're walking up, the same people that you hear speaking today, they were actually very gracious and helped us out by creating some student conference sample videos to help with our training purposes. So we are really grateful to them and for all of their work.
Thank you all for doing that.
Good afternoon. I am Nikita Pitch Dawson. I am the school counselor at Jerry Zucker Middle School, well, at least one of them. And I am joined by our team, which they will introduce themselves. But I think having our data conferences has been one of the plus that we can do for our community. When we talk about building the home and school compact, what a better way than not to have our parents be in our buildings learning about what their students are receiving and what their students need to receive. Those data conferences are providing our parents with information about past scores, about SC Ready, about MAP data. It's talking about where they are academically and where we need to move our scholars academically. The way we do our data conferences, they are divided up amongst the members of our school. So it's not just a homeroom teacher dealing with all of their homeroom students. We take an active interest in all of our students, and all of our staff members are engaged in having those conversations with our parents. So our parents leave with the same information. They know what their students' data look like, and they know what they need to do to work with us together to help move their students to the next level.
My name is Shaniqua Mustafa. I teach 6th grade English at Jerry Zucker Middle School of Science. And one of the things that I like about the data conferences is that it creates that conversational piece between the parent and the school. It's a shared partnership between home and school, and I look at it like a navigation system. The conference sets itself up so that you're able to chart where your student begins at the beginning of that year and where they should grow according to the course of the year. And so you're able to pinpoint like areas or pockets of opportunity, challenges that they're having, and then you're even able to tie in social emotional concerns that you may have, any behavioral challenges that may be a result of areas where there are deficits in their classroom. So it gives you an opportunity to have that conversation. A lot of times our parents don't see us, but this gives them an opportunity to come into the schools, sit into the classrooms, and hear the things that their students are doing well, and then hearing the things that they may need help and support in.
Hi, Desiree Moat. It really is essentially just a demystification of data. Parents don't know, what does it mean that my child has this Lexile level? What is this quantile level? Where do they fall in terms of school average and district average? So it really opens up an opportunity for us to be able to speak to them on where your child stands, what we do to support you at our school, and hi, I teach your child.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
Thank you so
very
much
much.
for joining us.
Thank y'all
And
for telling
congratulations
us.
on the growth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I think it's really wonderful how the whole school participates in this so that it's not just the teachers talking to the parents, but you all engage in how that works. That's brilliant. Thank y'all.
Can I just say one more thing too? And as a parent and as a teacher, a lot of times, we don't always know what an IGP means. We don't know what an IEP means. We don't know what an accommodation or a modification looks outside of the context of the classroom. So this creates an opportunity for us just to have really meaningful conversations, taking the jargon out and explaining to our parents what they need to know for their students.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask them a question before they go? How much autonomy do you have at your school to deal with the parents on whatever the issues are? And how often do you have these conferences with the parents?
Well, one thing I will say, our mission speaks for itself. We are every student, every day, no exceptions, no excuses. So we have the autonomy to reach out to our parents at any time, and we encourage our staff members to do that, not whether you're the counselor, whether you're the teacher, whether you're the data clerk, whether you're the attendance clerk. We look at our students as our own. And so if there's something going on, we reach out to our students. If there's something positive going on, we reach out to our students. And I think the one thing we have to remember moving forward is that sometimes our parents haven't always had the positive experience with schools. And so when we have these data conferences where we're coming in and we're talking about your child and talking about what your child is doing well as what your child needs work on, we're building a better relationship with our parents to be able to reach out to them to say, hey, I need to move your child from PE because I need to put them in an academic enrichment class. Right. Because now they know what that data means, and they know that we're not just taking PE from your children, we're providing your child with the additional resources so that next year they will have the ability to go back into the regular exploratory classes that we have at our school.
Great, thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much for being here. Okay, all right. Any questions?
So when's the next time those meetings are starting to take place? Is that the end of this semester?
November 5th is the conference day, and they'll be completed, like if they don't get everyone that day, they'll have until December the 20th to make sure all of the conferences are completed.
Thank you.
So did I miss when they are offered? When?
This, right, November 5th.
I'm sorry.
November 5th.
So it's one time a year?
This is kind of like an event, not that conferences aren't going to occur other times, but this is one conference that's a very intentional, very purposeful, structured conference that we make sure that certain things are covered and provided to parents so that they have all the information they need.
Thank you.
It's a good experience.
Good.
And is it mandatory that parents come?
We want every parent.
It's strongly encouraged. We hope they'll come. We hope they'll come.
That's the goal.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay.
Thank you
The
very
next one?
much.
We have one more.
D, percentage targets for board goals. You guys are working hard today.
Okay, so now we're going to transition and provide you an update on where we are with the percentage targets for our board goals. Okay, so schools now have their updated performance goals. The rule of thumb that we used for setting these goals was based on reducing the percentage of students not ready by 10%. Because we're in year one of using this type of measure, at the end of this school year, we do plan to review these goals to establish statistically valid goal-setting method for subsequent years. So just bear that in mind. Okay. All right, you'll see on the screen the current status as well as the goals for the measure for elementary, middle, and high. Just as a reminder, this first goal, the performance goal, focuses on reading and math performance in relation to college and career readiness. The idea behind this goal is that students should graduate from high school with a reading ability and math skills that will allow them choices, either to enter college or post-secondary opportunities or to go directly into a skill-based career with a living wage salary. We will have annual targets and long-range goals to increase the percentage of students that are achieving at this level that will lead to their readiness at graduation, and we'll report that information on student performance for the district, each school, and each grade, and they do already have all that information at this time. All right, just as with the performance goals, data for growth goals have also been provided to all the elementary and middle schools with their goals established for 2020. As a reminder for this, for high schools, we do not have those assessments that are consistent across grade levels. For this reason, we are working on a locally developed growth metric to be calculated during the 1920 school year that will actually serve as a baseline so that we can set those goals for high schools for this measure in the spring of 2021. The growth goal focuses on students growing academically at least one full year in reading and in math. So in other words, no matter where a student starts, it's very important that they not lose ground, and in order to not lose ground, they have to grow a minimum of at least 1 year. The idea is that students will make 1 full year's growth from prior spring to their current spring, and that we'll continue to work on closing those readiness gaps for students. We will again have those annual targets and long-range goals to increase the percentage of students that are growing academically at least 1 full year, and then we'll also report that information at the district level, the school level, and each grade. All right, initially, this third goal, the readiness gap goal, was delayed 1 year so the Low Country districts within the Low Country Education Consortium could work on those K-12 workplace and soft skills that could then be incorporated into the state's college and career readiness criteria. Well, this data is expected to be disaggregated by subgroups to address our gaps in readiness for all students at all levels. After receiving feedback and through further discussion, the recommendation is to now alter this goal for this year to prevent the delay in setting goals for schools. For this reason, we are providing the goal that you see on the screen, Goal 3, as an interim goal for high school graduates until the Low Country readiness indicators are developed and they're expanded to all students at all levels. This interim goal that we're going to be using with high school aligns with the State Accountability System's College and Career Readiness Indicator that is reported on the state report card. We've disaggregated our current college and career readiness data so that we can provide the current status as well as the goals for addressing readiness gaps within these subgroups. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, on the screen, you'll see the district's overall college and career readiness gap goal, as well as the current status and gaps for reducing the gaps among subgroups. These target goals have been set based on that same rule of thumb that we're looking at reducing the percentages of students not ready by 10% and according to the subgroups that you see on the screen. And then lastly, Dr. Postwaite actually spoke of this earlier. As a resource for the board on October 28th, we will have Dr. Andy Hegedus and Dr. Beth Terasawa with us from NWEA to share information on MAP growth that's related to our NWEA Insights report, and will provide you an opportunity as a board to ask questions and to learn more about our MAP data in CCSD. And that's the update.
Are there any questions? Reverend Collins.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting that information.
Yes, sir.
The first goal, on the performance goal,
Yes, sir.
62.4 students in grades 1 through 8 will achieve at or above the grade level expectation in reading. What is the measuring tool? What's the tool we're going to use to measure results? What are we going to use to measure against? Something, what I'm asking for, something that any board member or any person can pick up, and they can see that the goal has been met or not met.
What we provided the last time we sat at the table and talked about our readiness metric, we provided a list of some of the assessments that we would be utilizing as a part of that. The readiness metric that we discussed earlier in the student data conferences actually shows that, the measures that are incorporated within that metric, and whether a student's performing at the readiness level or demonstrating that readiness level above that or below that. So we will have that data for you broken down. It's very easy to do. It'll be on your school dashboards, so you'll be able to see that.
So I'm looking for a standard tool that's going to be consistent from beginning to end, but without changes to what we're going to use. Secondly,
Excuse me, so I'd just say it could be a MAP test. You could look at the SC Ready test if your child takes an SC Ready test. Or if on either one of those tests, you could look at the Lexile level, and there are many different tests that measure your Lexile level, and that's why we're trying to build this local accountability, this local regional report card, so that everyone will know what that is, because other people keep changing the tests, and we can't tell what the numbers mean or what the ratings mean. So we're trying to get to exactly the point you described, but for right now, you could look at MAP or SC Ready very, very easily and see whether it's met or not met.
All right, then I'll move quickly as possible. I've been there a long time. When you're measuring growth in grades 1 through 8, I won't do all of them, but just 1 through 8 for now. And you said you're from 58% to 62%. My concern with that is that you're talking about thousands of students that you measure the growth for in 1 year. And a lot of times, the kids that are top performers, they perform very well. High scores, 99 and 100. But the lower performing kids may only score 25 or 30 or 40 or 50. And then we get an average of good and bad, and we don't know really exactly where we are to reach those kids that aren't making it. But we get an overall average, and when you have a district this large, 50-some thousand kids, the numbers don't really reflect a whole lot, unless you break it down by class and by grade, by school, so forth. And that's going to really be the true picture. What does each school look like?
And in talking to two principals in particular, they said this year more than at any time ever before, they knew going into the classroom, and it was drilled down to them, by class, by student, where they needed to get that child and what the goals were. That was just the feedback I've got.
Yeah, I want you to make sure that that's what you guys are also doing, because the averages are nice, but the individual data per school and per class is what we really need.
Yes, sir, and we do provide this overall measure for the purposes here, but schools are working with the data down to the level that you speak of.
They'll be on their individual growth plans too, right?
And they'll have individual dashboards.
Darby?
But, so Reverend Collins, with all due respect, I want the schools to have that individual information. I personally don't think, unless the 5 of us say we need it, that we need to have individual by class, by student data. That's not our role to have that. That's what the principals are supposed to be doing. It sounds like from Todd's conversation, the principals are hearing that from you guys. The principals are communicating that to their teachers, to the Harborview and Zucker folks we heard from. So we don't need to be looking at per school, per student data.
You don't?
No, we do not. That's not our role. We're supposed to be looking at they're supposed to be doing it, but the staff is supposed to be doing that, but we're supposed to be looking at the data that we have, the data that we've asked for about some more information on achievement gap and closing that, but we shouldn't be looking at individual classroom data. And unless the 5 of us ask staff to provide that, we shouldn't be providing that.
I respect your thoughts, but for me, I think all the data is important, and the more you have, the better decisions you can make. Now, if a school is struggling, we need to find out why they're struggling. If they've been chronically struggling for 20 years, we need to get to the root of that. And when you put all those kids together in one lump sum, you cannot address individual needs by school and by class and by grade. So that's why the data is important. We must have.
Right, but I would agree.
So, Mr. Chair, I would say this is, if these two feel that individual, it becomes a board vote at your pleasure.
Okay, but we need to take action on
Where are we now?
on D. So I move to adopt the achievement and growth target goals for the 1920 year.
Second.
School year.
Todd?
Second.
Chairman Smart, your turn.
I'm chair. Oh, whoops.
Yeah,
Okay.
Priscilla, yeah, we're still in SEC. Yeah.
Todd, second.
So in 1920 school year?
Yes,
And we can't vote on our
Send it to
computers,
you.
so I'll have to go one
Right,
by
I
one, right?
understand.
yes, yeah.
Mr. Hollingshed, how are you vote?
Come back to me.
Ms. Coates?
I feel like they're a little bit too conservative, but at least it's a start. So yes for this year.
Mr. Garrett?
Yes.
Reverend Collins?
I want to vote yes, because we do need goals, but I don't think these goals here are going to tell us anything too much at the end of the year. Well, I'm going to be right back where we started from. We're going to have growth and make gains. It has to be different than what I see here today. So I'm going to vote no, because it doesn't reflect anything.
But just for clarification, if I'm correct, These are the goals that the board chose.
Yep.
So,
Oh,
right. So I just wanted to make sure that the
We're not
public
gonna set a
understands
bunch
these
of
are not
different goals,
goals
yeah.
given to us. These
Right.
were the
Okay.
goals that were voted on by the board.
everyone is.
All right, so you're voting no. Reverend Mack?
Yes.
I vote yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes.
Oh, Kevin.
Kevin.
Oh, back, excuse me.
Yes.
Thank you, Kim.
I'm sorry, Ms. Green.
Yes.
She didn't hear Ms. Green's vote.
Yes. She voted yes.
Oh,
So since this is a unanimous vote, will this be on potential?
Not
consent?
unanimous.
Not unanimous.
Oh, okay.
6-2.
Okay, and now we're on E. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Jeffrey? Well, while the staff is switching,
I'm sorry.
staff is switching, you know, at Jeopardy, sometimes they come back after break and they say, "We will accept your answer of opposable thumbs," when we really meant. During the break, a couple people pointed out to me that when Mr. Hollenshed asked me about assessments for abuse, it sounded as though I said, and I may have said, that we weren't going to have any assessment for 4-year-olds, and that is not what I meant to say. Tomorrow, that my slides will be posted, and I think on slide 20, I indicate that we need a different assessment for kindergarten children, and the staff is working with experts to see what would be appropriate for 4-year-olds. But I wanted to clarify that because I didn't want people to walk out thinking
Yeah, I
that
got
we
you.
weren't trying to maintain the integrity of
Yeah.
the purpose of
I got you, but that kindergarten expansion only yielded one African-American in that kindergarten. But I got you. I understand what you're saying.
If you believe it's the
So
assessment.
there were other children
Others
who
were accepted.
qualified.
Yes.
May have been qualified,
Others were
yeah.
accepted.
And they were accepted.
But they didn't
They were
go.
accepted, but they chose not to go.
Mm.
Okay, academic magnet, entrance process.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Natalie Ham, obviously, and we've got Robin Jones here joining us. Thank you guys for having us. We are here today to present to you kind of the staff's recommendation with regards to entrance criteria for Academic Magnet High School. This took a lot of effort to get to. I, of course, worked with the alumni group initially, and you all heard their presentation, and then I was able to take that presentation and work with just about every department that CCSD has to come up with these recommendations. So we're presenting it today to get feedback from you all and to get additional thoughts so that you all can make an informed decision on how you want to move forward.
We're voting on this now?
No, this is a public information item on your
Yeah, the
agenda.
policy we're voting on later, okay.
Okay. So I'm going to try and walk through the process to make it just as clear as possible. And of course, Ms. Jones, she has all of the background information, all of the, she's been intricately involved in running data and just making sure that these scenarios kind of work for us. So what we did was we took the criteria that the alumni initially presented and kind of boiled it down to what we would think would work best to serve Charleston County kids. And so there are roughly 170 seats in the 9th grade at Academic Magnet High School. So initially, we proposed that you fill at least 50 of those seats with the top 2.5% of 8th grader resident students from each CCSD middle school. That would include CCSD-sponsored charter schools. Okay, so that's at least 50%.
It would not include?
Would.
It
Okay,
would.
got it. All right,
Graders in
excuse me. Yep, all right.
CCSD chartered schools.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And so within that, we would also be sure to capture at least 2 students from every school, because if you take 2.5% of the 8th graders, at some schools, that only equates to 1 student. So at least 2 students from every school and at least 2 students from every zip code. And you'll see in your paperwork, it kind of gives you a little bit more background with regards to the intricacies of it. For instance, if, 2 students from 29201 were offered a seat and neither accepted, that zip code requirement would consider to be fulfilled, okay? So after that, so that is with no entrance criteria. The top 2.5% of all students from every middle school get offered a seat. They have 2 weeks to decide whether or not they're going to accept or decline that seat. Okay, and then the number of students from each school will be determined based on the 8th grade enrollment on the 45th day. Okay? And then next, we're going to use the entrance criteria, which looks a little bit different than it did before. The major difference is with regards to the teacher recommendation. Before, you were able to get between 0 and 4 points for a teacher recommendation, and the team thought that that was just a little bit too subjective, and so now it's a 0 to 1 point.
That's better.
Right. And so that, of course, took the maximum score that you could get from a 16 to a 13. So, but nothing else really has changed in the entrance criteria. And so what we will do is the students that have applied based on the same MAP scores and GPA and writing sample, we would then rank those students. And, right, am I right?
Right.
Okay. All right. I'm going to the priorities. I got to check with Robin. She's my keeper of all things here. Okay. So we would rank those students, and then we would apply priorities. And the first priority is that an applicant lives in Charleston County. Okay. And then the second priority is an applicant attends a CCSD school for a full year prior to applying. The third priority is that the applicant's domicile is in Charleston County, but the applicant attends a non-CCSD school. And the fourth priority is that the applicant's domicile is not in Charleston County, but meets other qualifying criteria. Okay. All right, and so we would rank those students and continue filling the seats based on their rank order until the seats are filled. And then once those seats are filled, obviously the remainder of the students will be placed on a waiting list, and with their order of ranking, and the waiting list will be maintained through the 10th day of the academic school year. Did I touch everything, Robin?
Except priorities do apply to the top 2.5% as well.
That is correct. The priorities also apply to the top 2.5% as well.
So you have to be a resident.
Got it,
How many
okay.
middle schools do we have in the district?
I believe that
would fit in this pool, including the CCSD-sponsored charter middle schools?
I think Dr. Williams just answered that question. Was it 19?
You said 16. 23.
Oh, okay.
The CCSD.
And with respect, how are the priorities applied then? So if my child is number 13 and is at a private school or homeschooled today, how does that whittle down to that student being accepted, not accepted?
Okay, well, it would start again with the priorities. So we first look at the students who are Charleston residents, who are attending, matriculating from a Charleston school.
Right.
And those students would then receive a rank order, and when we've completed that, diminished those students, we'd move to the next priority. We are not using the criteria score. That criteria doesn't supersede the priority. They have to meet a minimum.
Okay.
So it's foreseeable that if you are in one of the lower ranking priorities, that you may not get offered a seat.
Got it, okay.
Because they'll go through they'll take all the priority one, your domicile's in Charleston. Your direction. And you attend a Charleston County school. Those are the first two priorities. So they'll take all the students who scored between a 13 and a 10 in those categories.
Okay, so 10 is the new cut score.
10 is the new cut score.
Got
I
it,
failed
okay.
to
It
mention
was
that.
16 to 13, and they just removed the additional points for teacher ranking. So it's still the same point spread. And they'll go through all of the children who live in Charleston County and attended a Charleston County school. If they fill up the seats, they're not going to get to priorities 3 and 4.
Got it.
Okay.
Ms. Green?
That makes sense.
Is it possible that a student from Charleston County could be on the wait list and a student from outside of Charleston County gets selected?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Not if they have above a 10, right? Right.
If they meet the minimum
Yeah, I'm
criteria,
talking
right.
about in that category.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Reverend Collins.
Yes, thank you. The zip codes, if a student is offered the seat at a school, or maybe both students say no. So you have, well, I'm going to ask the question and tell you what I'd like to see happen. I'd like to see that go to the next two top performing students in that school. That school is still represented at the magnet school. Because if you choose two students, maybe their
Not
parents.
two students, it's 2.5% of the students.
No, but it really boils down to, Cindy, a couple of students at each school, maybe three at the most, when you do the math and figure it out. And it's not easy to do it either, it's a lot of studying. But it's not that many students we're talking about overall. If the two students say, no, I don't want it, my parents are going to put me in a private school or we go in some specialized school, why can't the next two performing schools, students in there, have those spots?
If they're not currently in a Charleston County school, we wouldn't
No,
consider.
they're in Charleston County, and by the zip code rule, if the first two students say, we don't want it, and then that's offered to the next two students that are top performers at that school, but it's by the zip code. Because this says, once you offer it, if they say they don't want it, then you've met the requirement. So what I'm saying is, don't let the seats go at large, but offer those same two seats to the next two students. And then maybe at that point, then let the seats go wherever.
So I think that, let me just make sure that I understand your question, because I think that you may be combining two things together.
All right.
Because the top 2.5%, those children are offered seats, and then we look
I know
at
that.
whether or not zip codes have already been captured there. So if they have not, then we will go and find the next students in particular zip codes to make sure that that quota is filled. If they're not already captured in the 2.5%, if they're already captured in the 2.5%, then we don't even.
Oh, yeah, I understand that.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm on top of this by the zip code now. That's why
Okay.
I pertaining to the zip code only. That if you offer, because this says that if you offer it to the students by zip code, and they were rejected, then you've met your obligation.
Okay.
So what I'm saying, instead of saying that, go to the next two students in that school.
Okay.
By the zip code, is what I'm asking you to do. One more thing is, actually, when you said, on the writing sample, for example, which is subjective, is there a way to have a writing or a reading test for admissions that's electronic, that's not subjected to anyone or a group of people having to score it, but like you sit down, like you take a math test online, or maybe a virtual, you take a test. There's not a single person grading it, but the scores are already fit there. Maybe it could be writing and questions and reading, because the goal is to see how well students can read and write. It's a writing sample, I imagine. So does that have to be subjective? If you got 4 points type on that, possible. Why couldn't that be a computer-based or electronic-based, or where there's no one's opinion involved at all? You got it right or wrong, or you earn the points or you don't earn the points. So electronic test is what I'm asking for the writing sample.
Okay, Reverend Collins, the writing sample is blind scored, and it is at least two of the reviewers, two of the readers. There's a training ahead of time to calibrate all the readers, so when they're reading, if one scored and another one scores, and if there's a discrepancy in the scoring, then a third person scores. As far as typing the test, I think that's something that can be done, but of course, we're concerned about spell check and all those things, and it goes down to the actual students being able to perform. But that's a conversation that we could have probably later, but
Right,
I
and I
understand.
understand what you're saying. And my whole goal is to get rid of those examining the tests and just let the computer do the work itself. That way, there's no subjection of anyone's exercising the score. That the score is calculated by the system.
Okay.
That's what I'm
Thank you,
asking.
Reverend Collins.
Okay.
Ms. Coates?
So it's really not that complicated to figure out 2.5%. In the time that he sat here, I figured out the North.
No, by good grades, by having high grades that qualify. It is.
by sitting here, the top 2.5%, if you just assume every eighth grader gets there, North Charleston by far has a larger population in the first pool. But my question is, like,
Gonna miss
for
it,
example, may I, sir?
Yes, yes.
You do have schools in which 2.5% of the eighth grade student body does not equal 2. Will there be 2 from that school?
Yes.
Okay. And if there's one in which 2.5% of the eighth graders, which there is in fact in a couple of North Charleston schools, 4 or 7 students, they're all offered the seat.
That's correct.
Right,
That's
it's
2.5%.
rounded up.
And when you do zip code, have y'all done a zip code analysis? I mean, it's particularly in some of our areas, multiple zip codes go to the same school.
Right, there are 24 separate zip codes in Charleston.
So if you're in a, so if you're in a school and you do the 2.5%, if an unrepresented zip code in that school, you automatically get into a seat there. How does that work? Let's say we're in a school that's got 4 zip codes, but 2.5% of the eighth grade class is 3 people.
Zip code won't be specific to the school. It'll be the entire population of students who've been accepted to that point. Even though we've covered 2.5% or offered 2.5%, they have to actually accept. And then we'll review to see what we're missing. And then the top 2 students who are in that zip code that we can find will be offered an opportunity. But it may not be school-specific, because of course, students who attend schools now may be on transfer, they may be on,
So that does seem to get a little complicated, because now you're saying, I'm the smartest kid at my school, but because I live in the same zip code as that child gets in because of the zip code, even though we're not in the same school. I see that we can introduce some complexity there.
Well,
I don't want to name a school with multiple zip codes, because I don't want to shot,
Burke's got multiple zip codes.
Okay,
Or
so-
Simmons Pinckney's got multiple zip codes.
So then you've got 2.5% of their population gets you 4 kids, and there's 5 zip codes.
Okay, one separate from the other. Once those seats have been offered, then we'll do a review for missing zip codes in that way.
Right, so then you're going to have a zip code that is abused attendance zone school, but they don't go to abused. Or Burke.
Burke, yeah.
Simmons Pinckney.
Or Simmons Picnic.
It could be, because we've already taken care of the individual school top 2.
Has anybody run the numbers to find out what your student population is going to be? Because it looks, the way this changes markedly from our original presentation is it's absolutely capping that population at 680 kids. There's 687 kids at Academic Magnet, and I'm still not sure that out of 47,000 kids, only 680 can handle Academic Magnet.
Well, we have determined that, well, based on today's numbers, it would be approximately 177 if we base it on top 5%. We divided that, of course, to 2.5%, so we're expecting about 80, 90, 89, 90 students. If you add on the zip code, we may capture another 20,
That's what I was going to say. So
25, 30.
have you run the numbers of what happens when every zip code is represented and 2.5% of every school is represented?
It could be another 48 students. Yeah.
I mean, a total.
Yeah.
How big would that class size be? Has anyone sat down and said, I'm going to run the assumption?
Let's just say 128. If everybody
It would
says
not-
yes.
It would not equate to the current
Ninth grade.
177 students, ninth grade class.
Well, actually, it's 186 right now.
No, I'm looking at it. There's 185 kids in the eighth, ninth grade class. I'm saying, have you run the numbers, assuming 2.5% of the eighth graders in every school say yes, then you have a gap of zip codes. You add that, then you add the other ones. Has anyone run the numbers of how large the class could be if everybody says yes?
That's what I was telling you all along, Lord.
Yes.
Yes.
And what is that number?
Less than 177.
I told you it's not
Okay,
easy.
Ms. Darby has a question.
Okay.
But, all right, so 2 things. One, I would think that we've found in our other top 2 program that we've done that not all the kids accept. So I assume that
Right.
you guys are assuming, hopefully, they all will, but not all of the kids are going to accept who are in that top 2.5%.
And we're also assuming that that we would capture some zip codes with the 2.5%.
Okay. The other thing I just want to say is thank you for doing this work, and in case anybody's here or anybody hears about this, this is not something that we've just started. This is something that discussion started on before those of us who were elected in 2014, the board then was talking about making some changes to the academic magnet admissions process. So this is something that's been talked about for more than 5 years. So I appreciate the time you all put into it, and I'm confident that the 9 of us will be very thoughtful and take input from folks as we move forward on this. So thank you.
Yes, so the point I was trying to make a little while ago is that when you have the schools with low performing, with a certain degree of low performing students, and then you may have at the top of that school proficient or excelling 5%, 3%, 10%. That begins to narrow down the pool of the actual candidates that can go to academic magnet school. So this is what I was trying to say. It's cool. When you begin to really multiply and dig down through it, you're not talking about everybody at the school. You're not talking about the whole entire 9th grade class. You're only talking about those kids that are top performers at those schools that are doing very well. And that can change easily overnight. But to narrow down the nitty gritty, you have to see who's already making good grades to qualify to begin with. And that's really going to be your actual number, those kids that are already at the top. Not the overall number, but the kids that are already there that you really can choose from.
Thank you, Reverend Collins, and in the interest of time, we need.
I have one more question.
Okay, can you
So
make it
what
quick?
are, two questions, sorry, Lyde.
Come on.
First off, 2.5% of the 8th graders sitting in desk today is 60. Just so you know, if you add them all up and go 2.5%. So my question would be, maybe I'm not, maybe I added.
Including the charters, into the sponsored charters.
Yeah,
Are they in here? I would assume. But, so even if they're not, that adds 10. So you're talking about, I'm just wondering, I wonder if we can increase that to 3%. I'm wondering how we can capture more. And until we get to the vote, I'm gonna be trying to squeeze, 10 more kids into the school, because again, I still don't think, if we've got high schools operating with 500 kids successfully per grade,
Right.
I don't know why we cling to 170 kids per grade creates the success. But the other question is this a lottery is this a ranking of score for the second 50%?
So to address your first question, we have run the numbers. I'm not sure what you have, but 2.5% of 8th graders of all CCSD middle schools and CCSD charter schools is about 88 or 89 students.
Okay.
I think it's 7th grade, that's what it is. We were considering those who are going to apply, so it's probably the 7th grade
Okay,
numbers.
maybe 7th grade numbers. There we go. And secondly, yes, it is a rank order of the scoring based on the rubric.
So there's going to be about 75 to 85 kids in the grade from the top one, and then the other 50% is back to the same thing we do now. It's 0.1% or 0.05 on a score is going to determine you get in or get out because it's ranked.
Right, and then if students have the same score, if there are 20 students with a 13, then that gets randomized.
Okay. What's the next steps?
Can I clarify one thing? It is a minimum of 50. We're saying we'll start with that, and then when we add zip codes and other things, we could easily be a greater percentage than the total.
Okay. And what are our next steps to move this forward?
We're meeting with the principal of Academic Magnet later this week. She has a couple of questions, concerns that we're going to try to work through with her. She will then share with her teachers. We have some parents we need to share this with, and it will come back to the board for a vote, the first committee of the whole meeting in November.
Can we send suggestions in? Someone?
Thank you.
Yep,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next
That's
item
the
up,
end
we'll
of
turn it
it.
over to Ms. Green. The only thing we have to consider in this section is 6C. 6C.
So 6C is.
Policy. Excuse me.
Move for approval.
Second.
We're going to get sued for this?
Wait, hold on. I made a motion.
We got a second.
Kevin seconded it.
Kevin seconded. Now Joyce can tell us a little bit about it. The academic,
The policy.
IHB, the Magnet School and Programs, because the other items we voted during the agenda approval to put those on potential consent.
And I don't know, can go back through, because does everybody have a hard copy?
Yep, right here. Of the policy.
Can we get that thing off our screen so we can look at it there?
I gave it to her.
I'm gonna, there we go.
So you see which one? So you can, Natalie can talk.
This is, the only change in this policy is that it makes it consistent. It makes it consistent with the discussion we just had. Additionally, admission preference into countywide magnet schools will be given to students matriculating from a CCSD public school and to students whose family domicile is located in Charleston County. And this is, we're asking for first reading on this policy, and our apologies if it didn't make it.
Call the vote now.
Wait a minute. Say that again, Chris?
Call the vote. Good.
May I ask a clarifying question about the policy? Does this apply to all magnet-wide schools?
Academic magnet, right?
It applies.
All county-wide magnet schools, that means
Yes,
all,
ma'am.
okay, thank you.
Cindy, you can second that one.
Second.
Take my second back.
All right, so I made the motion and Todd seconded.
Oh, I had Mr. Hall show.
He did, but he took it back, so Todd is seconded.
So this is,
Call the question.
Which you can't really do, but.
this affects
So
your
we're calling
district
for, can you
positive.
I'll second it too, I mean.
It affects them positive.
So we will have to do,
It affects them
Yeah.
positive.
I'll be the second.
Yep.
Then I'll be the second.
Mr. Hollenshed?
How do you
All right,
vote?
go ahead, ma'am.
The voice too loud.
I'll take aye.
I'm sorry?
Aye.
Okay. Cindy?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
Reverend Collins?
Yes, ma'am.
Reverend, Matt?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Yes.
So, and I vote yes. And I don't think we need y'all because we've already.
Thanks.
Could have told you that 4 hours ago.
Man,
Tell her
you did a
twice.
good job there.
Pay me later.
All right, the next item up is the appointment, the certification of delegates. I'd nominate Cindy Coates, and who has agreed, said she would go. Who else
I'll go.
wants to go? All right, Reverend Collins nominated. You're already on the board, so it's irrelevant.
No, these are the delegate, so may I?
Yep.
Okay, so there's a couple of things going on here, and it might be that I am on the South Carolina School Boards Association Board of Directors for this region. That doesn't by definition make me a delegate. So what being a delegate means is the South Carolina School Boards Association has sent all of you what they really, for lack of a better word, call their handbook. And it's their position that their board has voted on various items. Equitable funding is in there, 4-year-old kindergarten is in there, whatever's in that handbook. So when we talk to our legislators, we speak with a voice that comes from y'all. So 2 things have to happen today is y'all have to review that and authorize sending your delegates to the assembly to vote to approve that, so that when legislation's in session and they start talking about how this is going to affect reducing teachers in the classroom, there's a position in the South Carolina School Boards Association that caps students per teacher at all cost. And that's that's what we would be going up there and saying, look, this is more important. Teachers don't need 29 kids in every class.
Okay,
So you're doing 2 things. You're deciding that you want 2 people to go do and vote on approving or not approving your opinion of that handbook and who those 2 people are.
Okay, we've got
All
Ms.
one
Coates
person.
and Reverend Collins nominated. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, all one person can go and take all the delegates.
That's true. I hadn't thought about that.
Right. Okay, in addition, does any other one else want to be nominated? All right, do we have a second for the motion of Reverend Collins and Mrs. Coates?
Second.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any
Can you guys take a picture?
Any opposed? Yep, y'all are required to
Please.
go together
We
and
actually
speak
do have
with
to
one,
speak.
speak with one voice.
I'll give her a hug.
To be clear, I think, and I'm not sure if it's on here, but there's a set number of votes that districts get based on their,
We get 16.
so can the motion include
That they should be
Half.
split 50-50 between the two of you.
that's the letter that will go to the School
Okay.
Boards Association.
The next item up is public comments, which we've already addressed earlier in the meeting. Our next meeting will be in November. I move that we do we have a motion to adjourn this
To adjourn
committee of
the
the whole?
committee of the whole meeting?
So moved.
A second.
So when are we reconvening?
Right now.
All right, perfect.
Right now.